Welcome to the Wizard of Radical Self Respect. My name's Jared Mello, and I'm the Shepherd of Black Sheep. Today, we're going to break down a video from Dr. Anna. There's a couple to go over, really, but one of them is going to be how she's literally begging you to stop doing therapy speak. And she's part of a school of some of these therapists that what they'll do online is they will simply complain and call out other people online, and they'll say they're calling out misinformation. They'll say, and guess what, sometimes they're right, sometimes they are calling out misinformation, but it's their way to kind of be above everyone else, and they're going to call out other people because this woman, Dr. Anna here, she is basically the queen of appealing to authority. She is all about the credentials. She is all about having to do things by the book. And granted, there's pros to that and there can be cons to that. For example, when it comes to narcissism, I think, wouldn't you rather go to someone that has actually been through it themselves and who has experienced it? Because don't you think that person's going to understand a little bit better than someone who has only learned about it in a book? I would say so. But Dr. Anna, I don't think she would think so. She probably is someone that would say, well, personal experience counts for something, but the education and the studies and the research counts for much more. And to which that's just not how I see it. I've seen, especially in the social sciences, the evidence studies, they can be wrong. And like, there are some people out there, they need a study for anything you say. Oh, where's the study to back that up? Where's your peer-reviewed research? Where's your evidence-based this? And I would say, you know what? If you knew about studies and how there's a replica crisis in the social studies, the social sciences, I should say, perhaps you'd be a little more hesitant than to stamp your seal of approval when you see a study. Kat, what's shaken? She's first, besides Phil Bradley. Danielle from Hell, welcome. Jose. Holy shit, it's Dr. Uden. What's up? Goth Queen. We're going to see. I'll have to see. Something about her. I don't know. Like, I don't know. She's not wrong with a lot of things that she says. There's just something a little bit about the attitude. I don't know. Not my favorite. The cat's doing pretty good. And she also went over the Oprah thing. And I think that'll be another good one to go over, to see what she says about the Oprah no contact and estrangement piece. That'll be a good benchmark there of what we think about her. Now, granted, some of you here, you might know her. You might know her and you might really like her, for all I know. But we'll see. We will see. Mac, what is shaken? Not too late. We only started this 3 minutes ago. And basically, in the first video, we're going to go over what happens is she's upset. Because granted, she's going to go over some good examples of people kind of going too far. And as I said, there's a group of people on Instagram, Raquel, the capacity expert. She's one of them, where they'll talk about how, oh, people are using this words wrong or protecting your peace wrong. And they're basically trying to shift the pendulum back, right? They're upset about the people that are in quote unquote pop psychology. They really hate themselves some pop psychology, the people with credentials. And granted, like, maybe if I had credentials, I'd be right there with them. I'd be hating on it with them. Those stupid bastards that know nothing with no credentials. You kidding? I'd be like, you shouldn't even be talking about it. But it's like, it reminds me of my uncle. When he turned 18, in like 1968 or something like that, they turned the drinking age to 18 like the week before he turned 18. Then when he turned 21, they upped the drinking age back to 21. And then he would always joke when he turned 25, he was the biggest advocate to make the drinking age 25. Oh, Lord, oh Lord. So Kat's probably been singing over there across the pond. And Danielle from Hell. Danielle, we're going to say she's Danielle from the flock of black sheep. Danielle from heaven. And so Narcs used the phrase, a woman should give me peace, aka let them do what they want. Exactly right. So I hate the word peace now, for sure. That's a deflection. Absolutely. Christy, welcome. We're going to see if George and Jolly and Rhodes and Michelle from last night and whomever else decides to pop on by. Oh, you write books and dance, huh? That's pretty good. Nothing wrong with that. Like having the flock of black sheep here have some good interests. Absolutely. Let's pop into this here. See, and you can all tell me what you think of Dr. Anna here. And granted, she's smart. There's no way I'm not going to dispute that in any way. She's an intelligent person, but we'll see. She's like, her thing is just all by the book with her. And that's just not how I've gone about things for the very most part. I'm a little more, they'd probably consider me rough around the edges, is probably what they would say. And maybe they wouldn't be wrong. But the experience that I have with things is personal experience with a lot of this. The things that I talk about, I've literally been through, whether it's addiction, narcissistic abuse. And I know she'll actually say some things I don't think you guys will like, actually, now that I think of it. But we'll see. We will see. All right. Here we go.
It seems like everywhere I look, people are complaining about therapy speak.
Do you ever want to say how you really feel without consequences? Do you have no intention to ever work on yourself but want to seem evolved? Do you want to get away with literally anything you want? Then you might need to learn therapy speak. With therapy speak, you can bail on things last minute.
Hey, I can come to your birthday tonight. I need to honor my personal boundaries and conserve my emotional bandwidth. I'm at capacity right now.
Oh my god, of course. Protect your peace, girl. Avoid being there for your friend. You need to lean into the discomfort, practice radical acceptance, and learn how to self-soothe. True, you're literally so wise. And break up with people with no explanation. I'm not in a space to authentically show up, so I'm practicing compassionate detachment. Oh, that's so valid. If I ever go to therapy one day, I'll probably understand then. But therapy speak. Do whatever you want and still sound like the better person.
So, I mean, that video, of course, is an exaggeration and being black and white with the problem, but they're making a point. So people should be careful. Just because they use therapy speak doesn't mean they're automatically correct. Doesn't mean they might still not be dismissing others or kind of being neglectful of others or just kind of being a crappy person sometimes. Yeah, all true. She's probably going to call that out.
So fun tonight. I'll see you this weekend at my housewarming, right?
That's what I was.
To be radically honest, upon further reflection, it has come to my attention that I'm no longer able to spend time with your friend group because I find them to be insufferable and, quite frankly, toxic. In order for us to spend more time together, it's going to have to be one-on-one outside of them.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Did someone say something?
No, it's just their vibes. It's just their vibes.
I don't care how much like TikTok therapy speech you have internalized. You do owe people things, especially if you're in relationships with them. Like if you're friends with someone, you do owe them a text back. You do owe them hanging out. You do owe them like honesty and empathy.
I see estranged parents complaining about how their kids are saying they're setting boundaries or protecting their peace. We've got people egregiously misusing and misunderstanding terms like gaslighting, celebrities saying they're holding space, whatever that means.
This week, and this woman here, she has a doctorate of psychology. She looks super young, though. I don't know how old she is. Can't be too much older than 30 if she is. So I don't know if she sees patients anymore or if she's just a YouTuber now. I'm not sure.
People are taking the lyrics of Defying Gravity and really holding space with that.
People brutally trying to cancel each other under the guise of accountability. People watering down the word trauma to mean even like everyday small inconveniences. People saying they're triggered anytime they simply feel uncomfortable with something.
And she's talking like this guy I know, Joe Nucci, as well. He wrote a book called Psychobabble. I might invite him on the channel. I have a feeling some of you might not like him, though. If you didn't like the dude I interviewed the other day, Justin Nault, you'd probably think this guy's even worse. But that being said, he does make some interesting points as well. He kind of has an antagonistic tone, and if I invite him on, you'll probably see what I mean. But it's just some different perspectives that he might provide, which some of you might find interesting. But I'm only mentioning him because she kind of does the same thing.
Something, and of course, people calling each other toxic and narcissists at every chance they get. I feel ambivalent saying this because as a doctor of psychology, my entire education has focused around how to correctly use these terms, and my entire channel is focused on educating other people how to correctly use these terms. And while I still think it's really, really important to understand these terms and for professionals to use them, I've been warning y'all for years at this point that a loud minority was going to run therapy speak into the ground. And I think that time has finally come. I think it's fine.
And here's the thing about therapy speak, right? In terms of teaching people things, some people are going to misuse it. You can't prevent that from happening. Learning about this stuff is a tool. Some people will misuse the tool. You have a hammer. Some people might try to misuse a hammer. The same thing with a gun, right? But this is what education is. Education is a tool. Not everyone's going to use it appropriately. Some people might misuse it. But it's better than the alternative of people just being in the dark and not aware. That's the alternative here. Now she's saying, well, we should be using the terms correctly. Sure. I'm not going to say she's wrong about that. Of course not. She's right. We should be using the terms correctly. I think some people just get unduly upset about the misusing of the terms. I think it's out of proportion in a way.
Finally, time for lay people to stop using therapy speak in everyday life to each other. People are just really fed up with the way therapy speak is misused by people. And if you actually want to be effective in your communication with people in your life, therapy speak is not usually the way to go about it. I'm literally begging you to please find different words to communicate what it is you're trying to say. And I'm going to give you some help with that. Today, I'm going to try to offer some alternative ways of communicating that better get your point across and better meet your goals in interpersonal situations that don't involve misusing therapy speak. Let's get started.
Let's see what this says. I mean to read this. This channel is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this channel is intended as therapy, nor as a substitute for healthcare services of any kind. The thoughts expressed in videos are my own personal opinion and do not reflect the opinion of any institution I am involved with. My videos are general and not specific to your unique case. I do not provide personalized advice here. That is a good line because I've mentioned before, we're given generalized advice. And until we're hearing your exact situation, you should be careful putting it through the lens of whatever we're saying in the moment, unless we're specifically talking to you. If you are a past client due to confidentiality/privacy, I cannot engage with you on this platform. Oh, interesting. If you are having a mental health, well, not that she would even, I don't think she responds to anyone. If you are having a mental health crisis, call your national emergency number, such as 911 or a crisis hotline. Good disclaimers.
Okay, the first thing you need to understand is that if you're actually dealing with someone who has narcissistic personality disorder or someone who is, quote, toxic, which to me, the way I define toxic is someone whose presence causes you serious harm, who in large quantities is sort of like emotional poison to you. If you're dealing with someone like that, calling them out is like the last thing you should do. This is emotional survival 101. And by the way, not everyone who is toxic is a narcissist. Narcissism refers to a very specific cluster of traits. A lot of the people that you guys are calling narcissists are people who have different personality styles, but tend to be high conflict usually, tend to be low in self-awareness. Those things can encompass a lot of different personality structures.
And so here's the thing about this, right? You'll never hear me say to people, call this person a narcissist. In your own life, Yes, call them a narcissist. Now, I will never say that for the reason that she said in the beginning, because a lot of times trying to hold them accountable is not going to be getting them to admit they're wrong and to admit you're right. The way to hold them accountable is to simply enforce consequences. That being said, are there toxic people that are not narcissists? Yes, there are. Yes, there are. I mean, narcissist is not a perfect word, but it does help people find the space here. And it's a placeholder word so that people that have had a similar experience, they can relate to the things that we talk about when we make a video about, say, a narcissist does this. Well, a lot of people can relate to that video because they've had someone in their life that did those things. Now, does that mean that person in their life is a narcissist? Not always. They can be abusive. They can be maybe a borderline. Maybe they can be worse. Maybe they have antisocial personality disorder. But as I stress, it's not the label that's important. It is, how are they treating you? And I don't care. And that goes for if someone says, oh, I'm on the spectrum, I'm autistic. Well, it's like, well, guess what? If you're abusing people and you're autistic, that's a problem. And if you're in a relationship with somebody, that other person shouldn't be giving the person with autism a free pass just because they say they have autism. Again, behaviors over labels, always. I think the only helpful thing truly about thinking someone's truly a narcissist is recognizing, no, there's no exceptions here. You have to accept this is how they are, and you have to treat them accordingly. I think that's the benefit of the term, because sometimes if people don't think they're a narcissist, they might think they'll change or they'll improve. But regardless, usually not going to happen anyway, right? Even if they're not a narcissist, how many people are truly improving if they've been that bad? For you to even think they might be. How many people that have been abusive truly change? Probably not that many, I would say. But let's go on.
Doesn't always have to be narcissism. And also, not everyone who's a narcissist is an abuser, and not everyone who's an abuser is a narcissist.
Not everyone who is a narcissist is an abuser, and not everyone who is an abuser is a narcissist. Now, I would question, and Dr. Salerno and I went over this before, right? He said in the definition of narcissism, inherently, that is often going to be an abusive way of being. And I would argue, well, show me a narcissist that isn't abusive, for one. Just like I'll say, show me a narcissist who isn't an asshole, too. And the other part of it is, at the very least, I think a narcissist will be invalidating. And is invalidating always abusive? Maybe not always, but very often it is. So you can make that distinction if you want. Not all narcissists are abusive. But for the sake of my channel, does that matter? Not really. That doesn't really matter. But there are other abusive kinds of people that are not narcissists. That's true too. An asshole can be abusive. A borderline can be abusive. Someone who is emotionally immature could even be abusive, I think. Or, and of course, antisocial personality disorder, people that are psychopaths, sociopaths, etc. Yeah, all of them can be abusive. So narcissists aren't the only one. They just are the simplest thing to point to a lot of times. And granted, that can lack nuance, right? That's what she would probably say to me. She goes, Jared, you say the word narcissist, and there's other people that are out there doing these things. And I would say, okay, I guess you could say toxic in some of these cases, but narcissistic abuse in particular, that is a different kind of thing, right? That is a different kind of thing. The argument then would become, are narcissists the only kinds of people that can do narcissistic abuse? That's a good question too.
So please also stop using the term narcissist to refer to just an abuser. Because again, abusers come in all different shapes and sizes personality-wise. But putting all of that aside, let's assume that you're actually dealing with a narcissist. If you call someone a narcissist who is actually a narcissist, they're going to likely feel immense shame.
No. I don't like that already. For the same reasons I called out Dr. K, this is just, I think that hypersensitivity to criticism is not intense shame. Is it sometimes shame? Yes. Always? I don't think so.
Project and flip it onto you and say you're the narcissist and go on a smear campaign against you to frame you as a narcissist.
Yeah, so if you call out a narcissist, they'll often use DARVA, right? Deny, accuse, reverse victim, and offender. Sure. It's one of the reasons why I say you shouldn't be calling them that anyway, because it's not like they're going to agree with you. All they're going to do is flip the script, use DARVO or play the victim or something. Maybe they'll be a cry bully about it. But what we do is take action, enforce consequences.
Guarantee that is how they're going to react. Or if you're just, trying to call out somebody toxic, you're telling this person you're codependent with your husband. You enable him because you don't let him experience the natural consequences of his behavior. And you're triangulating his relationship with his kids because you're forcing them to also engage with them after they've set clear boundaries with him. Whoa, so much therapy speak in there, right? Like, I know exactly what that means. If you're a frequent viewer of this channel, you probably know exactly what that means, but that's not going to be received well to actually say to someone. People don't enjoy being psychoanalyzed, and even in therapy, the therapist would never just say something like that bluntly to a person.
See, in my real life, I never use these terms when I'm actually like speaking to someone for the very most part in like a formal setting. I'll talk to my friends in the space. I'll talk to Kelly and others, and we'll talk like this, but we're not like, oh, Kelly, I'm going to set a boundary with you now. It's like, no, not at all. Like, that's just not how it works. I think some people, what happens is they learn some of this stuff and it's kind of like flexing a muscle. They want to show the muscle. Like, oh yeah, triangulation. I want to set a boundary with you right now. And again, it's just part of the learning curve that it seems like sometimes people like her don't have much patience for, especially if they're making content about it, I guess.
They would try to carefully, experientially get that person to realize some of these things on their own. It takes time. It's not something you would just completely throw on a person. That wouldn't be productive. Plus, you're not only psychoanalyzing that person, but you're also pathologizing them using terms from clinical abnormal psychology, which is again going to make that person feel shame, make them shut down, and escalate conflict rather than resolving it, which I would hope in a situation like that, your goal is to decrease conflict, not to make things worse. Now, in the moment when you're getting this brief hit of inspiration, it's I'm going to psychoanalyze this person, I'm going to tell them exactly what's wrong, and I'm going to use all this therapy speak. You think that it's going to be such a relief. You think it's going to be so satisfying that the other person is finally going to understand that you see them, you have them figured out, and maybe they'll also understand that what they did was wrong.
And here's the other thing. I don't think people are truly doing this outside of the actual creators. So you go to TikTok and you go watch some according to psychology folks or pop psychology folks. They're the people doing this, not really people in their real life. So who's she calling out? She's calling out the creators is really what she's doing here. Most people, I don't think, are talking like this. I mean, let me know in the chat. Have any of you ever spoken like this to people? Oh, triangulation, blah, blah, blah. Probably not, but let me know. No judgment.
That is never going to happen. People who genuinely behave in toxic ways are not typically capable of self-reflection. Calling them out only makes things worse.
So toxic people are typically not capable of self-reflection. I think that's a bit of a generalization. I think it would depend. I think sometimes they're not. But depending on what's causing that toxicity. Now, granted, is there a difference between a toxic person and toxic behaviors? Is everyone that displays toxic behaviors a toxic person? Now, I've had people say that to me in the past years ago. So I've tried to make a distinction between toxic people versus toxic behaviors. Anyone can behave toxically, but it doesn't always mean the entire being is toxic. Although there certainly are some people that seems like their entire being is toxic for sure. But are all people that have toxic behaviors incapable of self-reflection? I don't think so. I think it's possible, depending on what the cause of that toxicity is what I would say. Because again, maybe it's someone that when they're just riled up, maybe then they'll behave toxically. But when they're regulated, maybe they can self-reflect when they're regulated. When they're unregulated or dysregulated, no, maybe not so much.
The only things you can do is set boundaries, enforce consequences when they inevitably break those boundaries. Don't explain, defend, or justify yourself. Gray rock. So using the same example as before, you're talking to someone who you say is codependent with her husband. She's, shielding him from the consequences of his own actions, and she's forcing his kids to talk to him. Saying that, not going to help. What's going to help is instead not giving in when she tries to guilt you. Saying, listen, Ellen, I understand, you want me to buy 200 boxes of Herbalife from your husband or whatever because he went into debt getting it, but I'm not able to do that. And when she inevitably asks again and again, then just like pulling back, disengaging. You don't have to provide an explanation saying, oh, like this past month, my income wasn't so good. That's why I can't buy the Herbalife this month. You don't have to say, hey, it's fucked up that you're like triangulating right now. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to use therapy speak. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to psychoanalyze or pathologize or any of it. Again, all you can do, set boundaries, enforce the consequence of your boundaries, which is usually just to disengage because you can't actually control the other person.
Yep, I agree with that part. That's how you do it.
Don't explain yourself. Gray rock. Be plain, be uninteresting. Don't give that person anything they can latch onto. It is not satisfying. It's not satisfying at all. But trust me, the other person usually gets their karma. It just won't look the way you think it does. I don't know if I've told this anecdote before, but growing up, there was somebody who was just like consistently so mean to me. And I was just like wondering, like, when is there going to be justice? When is this person going to finally realize how horrible she's being and receive some consequences for her behavior? And then it occurred to me, she already is. She already is living through her own personal hell. Every day in which she acts the way she acts, in which she projects her distress onto other people, she is already miserable. There will never come a day when she has self-awareness and realizes, oh, I'm miserable because of the things that I do to other people.
I don't even know if I agree with that. I think some of them don't seem too miserable at all to me. Some of them seem to be feeling just fine because how they're operating in the world is getting them more of what they want. And they think, they treat people terribly and they don't stop to think too much about it. But her thinking of it is, oh no, they're just projecting their bad feelings and their shame onto other people. And they're really just walking around miserable all the time. And granted, there are some toxic people that are definitely miserable. Absolutely. Maybe more of the vulnerable narcissist types. Absolutely vulnerable. But are they all? I think that's a generalization. And just because she has this person in her childhood that was that way, does that mean she'll never self-reflect? I don't know if you can say that either. I don't know if she'll never self-reflect. It really just depends. It depends on what was causing the whole thing, is what I would say. But, you got to be careful with too many generalizations.
She's already living her punishment. So, this fantasy that we often have of like, I'm going to confront this person. I'm going to make them confront their own behavior. I'm going to make them figure out what's wrong with them. That's never going to happen. You're never going to get that satisfying moment of relief. Chances are that person is already experiencing their punishment every day of their life. So it's very important that you understand terms like boundaries.
Are they always experiencing their punishment every day of their life? I kind of think that's a dangerous way to see it, because not always. Not always. I mean, like, for example, it's like some personality disordered people seem to be extremely successful. Are they experiencing their punishment every day of their life? That's up for debate. Now and again, and this is where in the literature they would say, oh, if they're so successful, then they're not meeting the impairment requirement. And even according to other people, because a personality disordered person, at the very least, they're going to cause some impairment in other people's lives, right? But it's hard to see that. And so it's another one of the reasons why the DSM to me kind of falls short, because the needing it to be impairment of their life, work-wise or socially, it's just not always going to show up that way. That's why I say the narcissistic operating system. That's what matters.
Or gaslighting or enabling, that you're, well versed in abuse dynamics in order to sort of insulate yourself from abusers. But you must never actually use those terms with that person, or else they will know that You see right through them, and they will unleash a wrath on you like no other. Like, if you've ever done this, like, I'm sure some of you have done this, like, please let me know in the comments how that went for you, because I want other people to also see that, like, this is what happens when you use therapy speak to, like, confront someone on the way that using therapy speak when dealing with high conflict people, and that is not helping, because then those high conflict people are just going to latch on those keywords as like, anyone who uses this word is someone who can't be trusted, who is like immediately must be dismissed, must be invalidated. You know, like, so many people have said to like toxic family members, I'm setting a boundary with you, instead of actually setting the boundary with them, that a lot of people now say, you know, anyone who uses the word boundary is just, you know, been brainwashed by the internet.
And I agree with what she's saying here. Demonstrate, don't explicate, which means don't explain what you're doing. Don't explain your boundaries. Just do them. Do them and enforce them. It doesn't always need to be a conversation either, because like we've said, often they're just not going to agree. Now, what we'll also do, I'll read some of the comments on this video too when it's over. It seems like a lot of the people that follow her, they really get riled up at all the pop psychology stuff. They would probably hate me. A lot of her followers would probably hate me. They're like, oh, what are your credentials, Jared? You shouldn't be talking about anything. To which I would say, well, I went to school for addictions counseling and mental health counseling, but most of what I know, I learned from my own experience, other professionals, and the books that I've read. I'm always honest about that. I don't have a LPC or an LCSW. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't have a doctorate. I thought about going back at a point, and maybe one day I will. We'll have to see.
This young generation, they're just so disrespectful, yada, yada, yada. Don't actually use the term with them. Put it into practice. You know, you don't have to say, I'm setting a boundary with you. Set the boundary instead. But even worse, we now have a whole actually weaponizing therapy speak as a form of reverse victimization. People who are actually high conflict, volatile, harmful people who accuse others of being a narcissist.
Yeah, this does happen a lot, right? I always say there's nothing a narcissistic person won't twist and distort. Now, are narcissistic people the only people that will twist and distort anything? Perhaps not. Perhaps all it requires is emotional immaturity sometimes, but I would say mostly they'll have a narcissistic adaptation now at the very least, and they'll twist and distort anything. If you go no contact, they'll say you're giving them a silent treatment. You take a break from the conversation, they'll say you're stonewalling, or they'll weaponize what they hear in therapy against you. Yeah, this is always a possibility. For the same reason I said before, this education is a tool, and tools can be misused by anyone, especially narcissistic people and other toxic people. Absolutely.
People who use the term gaslighting to mean you just have a different perspective from me. People who say they want justice when what they really want is revenge. People who think boundaries get to control what the people in their life do. Bullies who claim they want accountability, but really what they want is to get their pitchforks out over someone making a minor human mistake, even after maybe apologizing for it.
Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. How have you been? Okay, I'm going to stop you there because what you're doing right now is trauma dumping by answering that question negatively. And I do not have the capacity to hold space for your trauma at this moment. So I'm going to set a boundary with this conversation so that only I can answer that question because I had a really good day. No, I mean, I'm fine. I just you said that your food was really, really good. And then you offered me a bite of it and I took a bite of it and I didn't think it was that good. So I'm just feeling really gaslit right now. Like the fact that you were prioritizing your taste buds over my potential taste buds is very narcissistic. And I think that you should speak to somebody about it. Actually, by you telling me that I hurt your feelings, you were criticizing me and I was heavily criticized as a child. So that is triggering to me. So I'm going to need you to dial it back in because when I am mean to you, it actually heals my my inner child. And I need you to hold space for that. Otherwise, I will have to go no contact.
Stop. Because that's like so triggering for me. I understand that your grandma died, but like that is so triggering for me. My grandma's still alive, but like I'm afraid of her not being. Therapist says I shouldn't be around people who don't respect my boundaries and my triggers. That's my boundary. I feel like you're really twisting my words and like kind of manipulating me. And I feel very gaslit right now. You're gaslighting me. Don't see why you wouldn't be able to rebuild the transmission.
And I think the majority of people doing this are the other creators. They're trying to make content about it, right? Or there's the people that are mocking it. But in the day-to-day life, are people saying these kinds of things? Probably not. I mean, it's probably just like we see it as a creator and we see this stuff, but we only see it online. Is it really happening in people's real lives? Not as much. I think I've heard Justin Bieber say boundary once to the paparazzi. This is my boundary. But, Justin Bieber, we'll give him a pass. Justin Bieber has been through a lot. I'll give him a pass.
In my car because you're my boyfriend and I feel like you're really weaponizing your incompetence at me right now. You're really disrespecting my boundaries by saying that you can't rebuild the transmission on my car. It doesn't matter if it's something that you don't know how to do, you're weaponizing your incompetence. I learned this in therapy. Setting boundaries. I really can't handle you trauma dumping on me right now. Okay, like I had to hear about your flat tire on the way to work. Like that's such a trauma dump on me when I have my own inner child that needs healing. Those are my boundaries. I just feel like it was really like narcissistic abuse when you decided that you were going to pick where we were going for dinner. Okay, but like, why did you have to pick? Like, why does this always have to be about you? Like, it's definitely giving narcissism. Well, if I asked you to pick, like, I just think now you're really gaslighting me. It's extreme gaslighting. You chose a place that we've never been to before, and you really were not considering my inner child in that. Boundary is that you don't get to tell me how you feel. That's my boundary. Setting boundaries.
Okay, I'm getting heated just thinking about this. Let's take a little bit of a break for a positive visualization exercise. Let me paint you a picture. It's Saturday morning. Outside, it's raining or snowing. So you make yourself a cup of hot chocolate. You sit down on the couch under the blanket and you pop open your laptop to stream something. But you're not just binge watching TV. This time you want to watch something that's both high quality and powerful. Something that will help you achieve your dreams. This has actually been what some of my Saturdays have looked like. It's some of my favorite time in the world, which is why I'm super excited to announce today's sponsor, Masterclass, a brand that I've actually been using for years. Masterclass is a platform of over 200 courses and thousands of lessons in a variety of fields. Writing, business, science and tech, health and wellness, cooking, and so on. It's a membership-based streaming service billed at $10 per hour, like Margaret Atwood, Dan Brown. Since say, I want this novel to take place over the course of 3 weeks, do a week and a half instead. Or I've spoken before about his advice on like sticking to your promises. Like when you introduce something to the readers, making sure that you actually follow intent. You're using technology to actually unlock this. Back to therapy speak. How do we deal with people who weaponize therapy speak? Obviously, we could tell people who weaponize therapy speak to stop weaponizing therapy speak, but that's not going to work. They're not going to listen. They like the power that these clinical sounding terms gives them in relationships. So instead, why don't we focus on how to respond when someone is using therapy speak for power? Obviously, you could just tell them to kick rocks. If they use therapy speak against you, you could just like set a boundary and disengage. But you could also get them to push past the label and try to actually describe what it is that they're talking about. When someone sticks to labels and avoids specificity, it can sometimes be a sign that they're not being completely honest. Somebody who's malingering, who's, for instance, pretending to experience some sort of issue for secondary gain, like let's say they're trying to get money out of someone. They might say, I developed anxiety, I developed depression as a result of what this person said to me. If I were to hear that, I would go, let's see what that actually looks like for them. They didn't talk about, I had my heart racing. I woke up sometimes with a feeling of dread. I felt helpless to change my circumstances. No, they were just describing the label. They weren't actually applying it specifically to their lived experience. Someone who's weaponizing a clinical term doesn't actually understand what the term means.
And that's true. Narcissistic people, they will weaponize the terms, absolutely. But also, when you hear her explanation here, narcissistic people might try to twist and distort what her explanation is too and use it against you. And you'll see what I mean.
They're using the term for secondary gain. So let's do an example. Let's say somebody's saying you're gaslighting me when you disagree with them about like a piece of news, for instance. You could say, I'm sorry, what do you mean by that? And they reply, well, you're saying that my reality isn't real. Well, then you reply, oh no, I'm so sorry, we're misunderstanding each other.
And so the big thing with this would be know who you're talking to first. If someone accuses you of gaslighting and there's someone that's already a problem in your opinion, don't even bother with any of this. Why are you even going to try? You're just going to get yourself into more and sink. You're going to sink in the quicksand of it all. You don't need that. Now, if it's just a person you don't know and they start throwing those terms at you instantly, pause for concern. But you can ask them with these questions just to see if they know. And if you think they're good faith, that's the number one thing to ask yourself. Is this person good faith? And when I say good faith, what I mean is, are they someone that is going to be honest? Do they have humility? If they were actually wrong, would they ever be able to admit they're wrong? These are things to ask yourself before you even bother engaging with them and having this kind of discussion. Now, another thing would be at the workplace or something. That's a border, right? It's a borderline thing because that depends. It depends on the specific situation, I would say.
Other. I'm not trying to say your reality isn't real. What I'm saying is my perspective is different. The way I see it, everyone has different perspectives. And gaslighting is when somebody tries to make another person doubt their sense of reality. Surely you're not saying that me having a different opinion is trying to make you doubt your sanity, is it? It takes the power out of the term.
And that depends, right? That really all depends on what the discussion's about. There are some cases where a quote unquote different perspective of reality could kind of be a gaslighting depending on the circumstance, right? Or at the very least, extremely invalidating, right? In which case, something that's extremely invalidating can also be pretty crazy making. But is it always gaslighting? Perhaps not always, but it can get a little iffy depending on the subject matter.
Turns out that they're not using it correctly. They probably don't even know what it means. Just play dumb, be like non-defensive and play dumb. Be like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought this term meant that. Does it actually mean that we have a difference of opinion? Or here?
See, when she says stuff like that, that's what makes me think she's a little bit condescending, because that's like what a condescending person would say. Like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought that this term meant this, but it meant this. And it's just like the slight tone, the subtle antagonistic tone I don't like.
Here's another example. Let's say somebody's saying you can't go to brunch with the girls because that's their boundary for people that they date. People they date can't go to brunch with the girls. You could say your boundary, okay, what does that mean to you? Well, it means, things I'm not willing to tolerate from a partner. Right. I guess I'm confused because I thought boundaries were for you, not for other people. Yeah, that's right. It is for me. But if you're telling me what I can do, how is that a boundary for you? Because otherwise there will be a consequence. Right. And that consequence is what? That I'm going to be upset. And that's totally within your right. You have a right to feel however you feel, just like I have a right.
And you better believe some narcissistic people would probably try to weaponize something like this against someone who's truly trying to use the things the right way. Absolutely. But here's the other thing. So she's right. A boundary is for us, right? That being said, there's a difference between what we're going to accept in our lives versus not. So if we don't like how someone's talking to us, it wouldn't necessarily be a boundary for us to stop. It would be more like, no, this is something I'm just not going to accept for myself, and I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to remove the situation. That part's the boundary, but communicating it to the other person, that's kind of like giving them a courtesy in a way. Like, hey, I don't appreciate this. If you continue doing it, it's going to be an even bigger problem. But if she's trying to say right here, oh no, you're saying this to me in a way that boundaries are for you, but here you are trying to control me. It's like, I get what she's saying, but if someone's mistreating you or calling you names or doing something you don't like, it's still up to you to do something, right? She's kind of getting in the weeds here with the semantics of the conversation about it. Honestly, that doesn't matter. You just got to do what you got to do. Practice radical self-respect. If the behavior continues, that's not somebody you want to be close with anyway, is what I would say.
To go to brunch with the girls, just like you have a right to stop dating me if that's a deal breaker for you. You know, essentially what you'd be saying in that interaction is like, you're misusing the term boundary. I'm not responsible for your emotions. And if this were an actual boundary for you, then the only thing you can do is break up with me if this is such a deal breaker. But you can't tell me what I can and can't do and hold your emotions over my head. The key is to actually understand what these terms mean. Play.
And so again, that's just like the semantics of what a boundary is. If someone's done something disrespectful, yes, no one's responsible for their feelings except for you. But that being said, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still act accordingly when someone disrespects you. So again, she's focusing on the misuse of the word boundary. But in terms of practicing radical self-respect, you don't need to have this conversation. You just need to act accordingly, enforce consequences, whatever they are. If you want to mention it to them, not to control them, but say like, hey, I don't appreciate when you speak to me like that. That's what you can say. You don't need to label it as a boundary. You can just communicate what you want. You can communicate your needs. You can communicate how you want to be treated. You can mislabel that as a boundary, but it's more like you're standing up for yourself.
Dumb and call out their misuse. This is why it's still key to understand these terms. Like, you guys, this is why I educate you on different clinical terms, because it's empowering. Doing so will protect you from people who use these terms to harm you. And also, like, another way that I think therapy speak has gone too far is self-diagnosis and people's need to self-pathologize everything about them.
And again, this is just where the professionals, they really dislike it. They want you to get professionally diagnosed. But here's my problem with this. I'm someone, I learned for myself, I'm on the spectrum. I went to countless professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, addiction counselors, LCSWs, LPCs. No one knew. You know what they did? They threw antipsychotic drugs down my throat. That's what they did. So what I say to people is, you're the expert on yourself. Now, granted, you got to educate yourself, though. You can't just be the expert and give yourself a diagnosis of something and you have no idea what you're talking about. No one's saying to do that. But if you've been working on yourself a lot and you've learned a lot about these things. So for example, when I interviewed Dr. Carey, a lot of people that thought they might be on the spectrum, they said, you know what? From what you guys are talking about, it sounds like me. Until I would say to them, you know what? Look into it. And Dr. Carey herself says, she's not against self-diagnosis when it comes to autism. And Dr. Carey said that. Not layperson Jared, but Dr. Carey said that. So I think there's some benefit sometimes in it. Now, that being said, does it go too far? And someone who just has a little trouble focusing, they'll call themselves ADHD? Yeah, that happens too. But that being said, are there real cases of ADHD that are diagnosed are self-diagnosed? Absolutely true. So, and part of this also, I think when it comes to the professionals, they just want people to be going to professionals. Wow, you need a diagnosis. What does that mean? Oh, well, you have to go pay them money now. You have to pay them money to get a diagnosis. It's a business, right? A lot of this is just, it's almost like an advertisement for other licensed professionals in a way. And that's a part of this, right? Don't ever get it twisted. This is still a business. And those services, they're also a business. Whether you're a clinical psychologist, a LCSW, LPC, a psychiatrist, they're all businesses. And when people go to the lay people, that costs them money. They're not going to like that. Why would they? So you got to take a step back and try to think about all the different angles they might be coming from here. So I'm not saying to self-diagnose yourself with anything carelessly. It's always better if a licensed professional confirms it for you. But I wouldn't mistrust yourself either. Like, once you've learned a little bit about yourself, you can begin to trust yourself. Hey, you might know, because you are the one that has to live with you, not a psychiatrist that sees you an hour a month or an hour a week. Like, think about that. How can they know so much about you, regardless of their education, if that's the only time they're seeing you. Just food for thought.
Somebody being tidy means they are OCD. Someone being in the zone when they're enjoying a topic is hyperfixation caused by neurodivergence. Someone getting overwhelmed is them having a sensitivity to overstimulation. Everything is autism. Everything is ADHD. Everything is anxiety. If everything is pathological, then nothing is pathological. If everyone has a mental health diagnosis, then it shouldn't really be a diagnosis because it's not abnormal, it's the norm within that culture, right? Like if everyone within a culture experiences anxiety, for instance, to a very distressing degree, then that's not outside the norm. That's not like at the tip of the bell curve. That's not something that just a small proportion of people experience. That is just probably the environment being sick. It's nothing to do with that person being on the fringes of whatever experience it is.
And so she goes so fast here with these edits, it's hard to pause her. But so Christian John and I were talking about this, right? He said, to be well adjusted to a sick society is no measure of health. I forget who he said that. Maybe it was Gabriel Mate or something. I don't know. But regardless, that is not what the psychiatrists say. The psychiatrists aren't like, well, it's a sick environment. No, that's not what they say. They say, oh, we're going to pathologize what you feel. We're going to pathologize whatever this is. And then we're going to give you an SSRI. And we're going to give you a mood stabilizer. We're going to give you an SNRI. That's what they do. So she's saying something that I agree with to an extent. But then again, the psychiatrists behind her, they don't act as if this is true. They think, no, you need a drug. You need this. So interesting, right?
Listen, there's nothing wrong with being on the fringes of that experience. Something being pathological doesn't mean it should be stigmatized, right? Like just because a minority of people actually meet criteria for autism spectrum disorder, for instance, doesn't mean that that is something that should be shamed. But like in therapy, we don't really use therapy speak with clients. We don't really use clinical terms with them because it's not productive. It's not how progress is made. Instead, we focus on concrete ways that clinical issues impact their specific life. Maybe.
And again, so there she goes again. She says, we don't use the clinical terms. Doesn't that sound like that woman from the other day on the Oprah show? Yeah, I don't use the word emotionally immature parents. And I would say this is part of the reason why sometimes the professionals, there's a disconnect. They have these standards that the credentialed world and the research-based world has that, to me, it doesn't always translate well to the actual day-to-day problems that someone else is experiencing. Someone's with a narcissist or an abuser of some sort. Is the way they've been taught to help them, is that the most helpful way? For example, never being able to talk about someone who's not in the room, not ever being able to use any of these terms. Is that the most helpful thing for the person? I don't think so. But they just have to be careful of all these lawsuits and all these things that can go wrong. And that's why I think sometimes the coaches that talk about this stuff, they might be the most helpful because they don't have to play by those BS rules. And just in case you think I'm BSing about this, Dr. Salerno and I went over this. One of our first 2 interviews, I asked him, why are all these professionals not helping? What's going on? And he had said, one, they're just not taught enough about it. For one, they're not learning much about narcissism and how these personality disorders show up in relationships. So they're unprepared a lot of times, unless they're learning it on their own outside of school. Another thing that he said would happen is they'll say to the person being abused, oh, try to empathize with your abuser. Put yourself in their shoes. And of course, that's not the right thing to do. And then they can't talk about someone not in the room. So between all of that, there's all these barriers to trying to help them in the most efficient way, to me. And I think those barriers are just no good. I mean, how are they helping? They're not helping, to me.
Sometimes a therapist would provide psychoeducation if it's empowering. Like, if diagnosing someone with a disorder and be like, hey, listen, like I'm about to diagnose you with this. I think we should talk about it. But it's usually much more powerful to, for instance, get a client to trust their therapist through small everyday moments rather than simply telling a client they have a disorganized attachment style. At the end of the day, you are more than a label or a cluster of symptoms. And whatever label you do or don't have, it doesn't change the reality of your experiences. You are you. You have the experiences you have, regardless of the name that you attach to it. And listen, I know that there are also benefits to identifying with a label. I've talked about them on this channel before. I'm not going to list them right now because I'm frankly tired of needing to say disclaimers for every single point I make. We're just not going to do that today, okay? It's strange that, millennials fought so hard to let go of the need for rigid labels, only for Gen Z to then go and want so badly to label themselves. Like, yeah, sometimes you do meet criteria for a label, but so often once we start identifying with something, then we don't want to let go of it. So even if it's something painful, like say, experiencing anxiety to a distressing degree, you don't want to say like, I have anxiety. You're going to be incentivized to stick with that label. It's a
Okay, so I see what she's saying with this, and I agree with it to an extent. We have to be careful with how we talk to ourselves. It's one of my problems with the self-aware narcissist that'll always say, hi, I'm blah, I'm a self-aware narcissist. I'm a narcissist. I'm a narcissist. It's like you're bombarding that into your consciousness. It's the same issue I have with the 12-step programs, AA and NA. I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, I'm Jared. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, I'm Jared. I'm an addict. It's like, or an addict named Jared, because they'll say principles before personalities. And I would say, is that really the most helpful thing? I think in the beginning, so you can remain humble, perhaps, but permanently, I don't think so. So, but again, though, the other side of it is, and part of what she's doing here seems to be just going to the other extreme. I would say sometimes learning about what you're feeling and labeling it can truly help you. It can help you start to make sense of what happened to you. It can help you to make sense of your experiences. And then when you can make sense of it, you can try to find out what to do about it. That's the other side of it, right? Oh, okay. Well, maybe on the spectrum. Oh, maybe that makes a lot of things make sense now. And now I know what I have to do. And I have to work with that moving forward. Oh, I was in a relationship with a narcissist. Oh, now it makes sense. Now I can understand everything that happened to me. I understand I went through the cycle of abuse, love bombing, devaluing, discard, hoover, repeat. I was in a trauma bond with them, and I was experiencing traumatic cognitive dissonance. Yes, all of that is super helpful and enlightening, especially in the beginning. So the labels have their place. The terms have their place. Do we want to permanently identify with some of them, especially if they're kind of negative? No, I wouldn't say permanently, but there's balance to this. It's not all the way one way, not all the way the other way either. There's a middle ground.
part of you as you see it. You're not then going to want to say, I'm a person who used to have anxiety. You're going to want to stay in that spot. Listen, like, I know like a lot of people are going to get mad at this, but I'm sorry. Like, I don't believe in self-diagnosing. I really don't. I think it's really risky. I think people often do it erroneously because it's not just about understanding that specific label. You could, for instance, understand what autism looks like very well, but you don't understand the hundreds of other mental health diagnoses that could look like autism.
And so this to me is just kind of the arrogance of a licensed professional. They know better than everyone else, and you just can't be trusted to know yourself. So she's all against self-diagnosis of anything. And of course, will there be people who self-diagnose incorrectly? Sure, absolutely. But will everyone who does it do it incorrectly? Also no. Also to note, psychiatrists and psychologists misdiagnose all of the time. And depending on who you go to several professionals. Each one could give you a different diagnosis, depending on what's going on that day. So to me, she doesn't take that into account. She probably knows it. She just doesn't want to say it. But that's also, like, I know this from their field. I was a patient under their umbrella. And Me and many other people like me, we got failed by the system. One of the reasons why I do what I do, because I took ownership of my health, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, and I figured it out. Was it painful? You better believe it. Was there a lot of bumps along the road? Absolutely. But am I in a good place now? Also, absolutely. I know a lot of people that they tried to do that way, the professional way, and they got put on hundreds of meds, tons of meds, try this med, try that med. And at the end of it, many of them were not helped. So I know a lot of that kind of the story. Now, do I have a bias in the fact that I know more of the people that weren't helped, perhaps? Maybe. Could there be an argument that there's a lot of people who were helped that I just never spoke to? Because why would they even talk about it? They're doing well. That's possible. It's possible. But often when you go to places like AA and NA, or you go to the subreddits of people that have anxiety, depression, autism, fill in the blank, there's a lot of people struggling. A lot of people struggling out there, and I see it, and they're doing things the quote unquote right way, according to her, but they're still not necessarily helped. So ultimately, I'm all for whatever helps someone. If coming to me helps them, awesome. If going to a licensed professional helps them, awesome. As long as it helps them. Prescription meds, if that helps, okay. I'm not against prescription meds. I prefer natural things, but I'm all for whatever helps. That's the bottom line. Some people, they seem really against one way or the other. They think, oh no, I'm a licensed professional. I don't want anyone doing things not my way. They're dangerous and they're mislabeling, misdiagnosing, self-medicating. It's like, that's just never been my way.
You can't rule those out because you didn't go to school for this. You don't have all of the background that somebody who is trained to actually use these words knows how to use. So in conclusion, I just think like we need to understand clinical terms for sure, but the time has come to maybe stop using them in everyday interactions with other people. Definitely not productive to call people out using therapy speak because it's only going to stigmatize the field of mental health and it's only going to make things much worse for you. There are much better, less satisfying ways to respond to someone. Also, again, people who genuinely want to weaponize these terms do a good job of doing it, although, they have a very superficial understanding of these terms because obviously genuinely understanding them does require a level of self-reflection. And also we're seeing people over-identifying with clinical terms to the point where I think it ceased to be productive. Educate yourself on what these terms mean. Understand the true meaning of them, not just the pop psychology.
We'll get back to her in a minute. Thank you for this too, Thrive. Hi, Jared. Also, many victims run to therapy often before seeking out this content and are misguided by their therapist about what's truly happening. Unfortunately, very true. And we see them a lot here in this space, don't we? We see a lot of people that try to go to couples counseling with a narcissist or someone that just went solo, and then that counselor or therapist just didn't understand. They didn't understand abusive relationships. They didn't understand narcissism. So they'd be the one saying things like, oh, empathize with your abuser. Put yourself in their shoes. And depending on the circumstance, it's just not the right way to go. Not the right way to go. And there's other ways that can be misled too, right? Other times it could be, I've heard some doctors saying things like, because there's so many different opinions amongst the professionals as well. And if anything, Dr. Salerno and Dr. Eatonson, they proved that the other day, right? They proved that they're both licensed professionals, but they have two pretty different ways of seeing the world. They have two different ways of seeing narcissism. So it's not going to be one size fits all, even amongst them either. So thank you again to Thrive. I always appreciate that. Super chats do help me do more of these lives, by the way. It is more beneficial to sit with the pain, discomfort, and despair, walk through it versus numbing it. Yes, I would agree with that. I agree. Somehow paying money for support and love just doesn't feel right. I get it. I mean, a lot of the best help I've ever gotten was free in AA and NA. I mean, and granted, a lot of it I did myself. So like I had people guiding me, but I did a lot of the work myself, and there was spiritual work in there too. An awake, yes. Journaling, absolutely. I'm a big advocate of journaling. And there's something Ellie said above here that I wanted to highlight because I think it was important. How many people voluntarily sit with the suffering person as is? Yeah, very few, Ellie. Very few is right. This is what it was. A lot of the so-called healing through various methods is all about emotional numbing and avoiding the reality of the suffering and impacts of abuse and shuffling patients for $1. Yes, there's a lot of numbing, a lot of avoiding, and it keeps the bills paid though, right? For them, keeps the bills paid and it keeps their lights on, keeps food on the table. But the true work, not so much. Not so much. Samuel, welcome. Three more lifetimes. Maybe not that long, Ellie. I went too far down the labeling road and I regret how I acted before because of that. That's part of the learning curve, right? We're not going to do these things perfectly. People, when they learn these terms, yeah, they might overuse them. They might misuse them in the beginning, but that's part of the process. I mean, is it mandatory? No, not mandatory to do it, but a lot of people do end up doing it. Sitting with oneself is the antithesis of addiction. Another good one is connection. Connection is the antithesis of addiction. Dr. Romani is profiting off all this fear and labeling. She's doing pretty well for herself, yes. She's doing pretty well. I mean, she's the go-to when it comes to narcissism, right?
Meaning of them, and please consider finding a different way to get your point across than using them in day-to-day life. Because at the end of the day, these terms weren't built for lay people to use them. They were built for professionals to use them and for other people to hopefully understand them. Don't forget to check out Masterclass's holiday sale. That is an incredible opportunity. It is such a fun way to...
All right. So that was that one. And then there's this one. This is the Oprah one.
Adult children on recently Oprah.
And this will be we'll get a good idea of this one too here. We'll get a good idea of what she thinks about this. I'll probably have more agreement with her on this one, although I didn't watch this one of hers, so we'll see. Awesome. I'll talk to you all for a minute too. Awesome Ragamuffin. It keeps me from ruminating. You don't want to be like Offspring. You don't want to keep them ruminating. For such a big shot, she had a wimpy book collection back there. What were the titles? Did you see them? What was she reading? Apparently, she used to live in America, but now she moved out of America. I think her parents were physicians or something like that. And I mean... It almost seems like she went to school and then like instantly just started making YouTube, because she can't be older than like 32-ish, can she? To me, she couldn't be. I mean, she's got 500,000 followers or something. Let's see.
It seems like
I lied. 632,000 followers. So she's a bit of a big shot. She's probably rocking and rolling with a YouTube ad revenue. She never goes live though.
recently Oprah came out with an episode of her show/podcast on parent-child estrangement or going no contact. Unfortunately, particularly because of the way it was marketed as a trend and just the way she handled it in general, a lot of people were pretty upset with her.
I just saw Oprah's video about the no contact trends, and I have some very specific thoughts.
Oprah, it's not a trend, okay?
Hey everyone,
Dr. Sherry. She liked one of my stuff the other day. She's also friends with Josh, and I might invite her on the show.
Been receiving so many DMs on Oprah's podcast today, and I know that it has stirred a lot of people up.
You know, my main takeaway from this whole Oprah thing is that we've been swallowing gruel, taking shit from our parents for so long, and our parents did it for so long that actually stepping away and healing looks like a trend.
Interestingly, I found out that estranged parents are also upset with her because they think she favored the adult children with the angle. Now, I watched the episode and I had a lot of thoughts. So I figured I would take you kind of frame by frame through the whole discussion and share what I thought about it. Because I think when you're dealing with such an important topic, you have to be really careful with how you frame it, or you could do more harm than good. And in my opinion, the way Oprah handled this left a lot to be desired. So let's get into it. Now, Oprah starts the show by explaining she's just kind of trying to understand what's happening here. It seems like she's sort of playing the middle ground.
I know this is a tender, hot button topic. My hope is that we can open up the heart space and really listen. I'm not on anybody's side. I just want to hear what everyone has to say.
And I gotta say, the angle that like estrangement is a problem that needs to be tackled is a little bit strange to me, considering many children experience abuse at the hands of their parents. According to the World Health Organization, 6 in 10 children under 5 years of age regularly suffer physical punishment and/or psychological violence at the hands of parents and caregivers. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men report having been sexually abused as a child. Consequences of child maltreatment include impaired lifelong physical and mental health. Child maltreatment is often hidden, with only a fraction of victims of maltreatment getting support from health professionals. A child who's abused is more likely to abuse others as an adult, so that violence is passed down from one generation to the next. There's already a power imbalance between parents and children. For 18 years of their life, parents have absolute power over minors. After that too, it's not like a switch suddenly happens and, oh, now you're on equal footing. In a lot of situations, parents continue to treat their children like they are the ones whose say is final. And a lot of parents sort of struggle to gradually give their children more power and autonomy over their own lives. So questioning the validity of children's decision to cut off their parents is a risky endeavor, in my opinion, because we already know child abuse is extremely prevalent. We already know there's a power imbalance between parent and child. And the percentage of adult children who cut off their parents, it kind of depends on the source, but based on the stats I just gave you by the World Health Organization, more children are abused by their parents than are cutting off their parents. Also, I think people are just talking about it more loudly now because of social media and because of reduced stigma, but I'm not actually convinced that estrangement is more common now than it was in the past, and people who make these sort of claims don't often have evidence to back them up.
Here's the thing, Dr. Anna. How would there ever be evidence? Seriously. Are they going to take a poll and try to sample size it out? Is everyone who is estranged from their parents going to participate in said study or poll? Of course not. So those kinds of things just aren't always going to be accurate. I think it can be slightly more common today, only because there's much more awareness of narcissism and toxic behaviors. More awareness, more people understanding they've been abused and mistreated, more people willing to do something about it that weren't normally willing to do something about it before social media. Before social media, people would just grin and bear it and say, yeah, family's rough. Nothing like family, you know. But not everyone left. Not everyone left. So, but again, does it really matter? Does it really matter if there's more now or there's less? Doesn't really matter. But I do think there's a little more that are doing it now.
You know, I stopped to think about it and I was like, do I actually know anyone who's estranged from their parents? I thought, I have one friend who's estranged from her parent, but it's more that like her parent just like disappeared off the face of the earth. I know one person who's Gen X who's estranged from a parent. So like nobody really in my generation in my personal life is estranged from a parent. And when I was working as a therapist too, in the first few years of working as a therapist, I was dealing with very underserved populations who were going through a lot, dealing with like parent-child conflict was honestly the least of their worries. But towards the end of my experience as a therapist working in college counseling, I had plenty of clients I can remember who had issues with their parents. But unless I'm forgetting something, I don't actually remember somebody who actually cut off their parent. Now, sure, this might be a selection bias. My experience is not necessarily a
And so just because she knows someone and they didn't cut them off, well, maybe they weren't learning about the stuff. If they were actually participating in the space where they hear all of us say the best thing to do is to go no contact, well, guess what? Now you've learned about it. Now you're more likely to do it. But as I said in the first video about this, when I broke down Oprah's show, people have been doing this as long as humans have existed. This has always been a thing, right? It just took maybe a little more assertiveness back then. Like you had to like just charge and get the heck out of there. But it absolutely happened.
Representative of the general population, but I'm just saying, like, I have no anecdotal evidence that this is as rampant as we see online. And I think part of the issue with the way Oprah is going about this discussion is it's all fine and dandy to be neutral when dealing with like a conflict between two people. But again, when we're dealing with a population where abuse allegations are so rampant, neutrality is not really cool in those situations. You know, like how would this—
And this is a good point by her. Neutrality does indeed help the abusers.
look if this were a show where Oprah said, like, man, a lot of women are divorcing their husbands. I just want to get to the bottom of why that is, you know? And then let's say some of the people she invites on the show are like, yeah, you know, my husband abused me or whatever. And she's like, oh, did he? Like, how do you define that? That would be incredibly messed up, right? But there's this notion that like when it comes to someone you're—
Now, didn't she say, oh, asking people to define the abuse? But wasn't she just saying in the previous video, trying to get people to define the terms they were using? Correct me if I'm wrong, but she was saying, oh yes, what do you mean by gaslighting? What do you mean by boundaries? And here she is saying, oh, that's incredibly messed up to question them about the terms. So which one is it, Dr. Anna? Tell me.
related to by blood, that you have to have like a really, really good reason to cut them off, that it's somehow like a hate crime to cut off that person. But everyone has a right to end relationships no matter the reason. It's a basic human right. In some situations, you know, even I might think, you know, that's kind of a silly reason to cut someone off. But at the end of the day, I will never think that it's a problem. I will never frame it as a problem that somebody is choosing to remove themselves from a relationship, because that is just a basic human right. So after Oprah introduces the topic, she starts by introducing the experts she invited on.
So my problem with it is not about the amount of people doing it. Now, the usage of the trend term means like it almost is an implication that it's not for a legit reason. To me, that's kind of the implication of the word trend there. The other issue with it is, and I broke this down in the video, Oprah was kind of covertly guilt tripping the dude when she said, oh, where did you get this idea from? Like he had to come up with the idea from somewhere, couldn't have been his own idea. And the implication there was there's something not quite right about him doing that. That's more of my problem with her framing. About the amount, she could have said, why are there more people estranging from their family? And I wouldn't have had a problem with that, because I do think there's probably more. But the trend word is a little bit iffy to me.
The show. And she starts off with Dr. Josh Coleman, who I've actually heard of before because he's often cited by estranged parents. Now, Dr. Coleman has positioned himself as someone who facilitates healing between parents and children, who has been through estrangement himself, came out of it on the other side, and now has like this golden formula that parents can use. But the thing is, in my opinion, Dr. Coleman has violated the APA Code of Ethics in more than one way. There's a Reddit post that claims he reached out on behalf of an estranged parent, client of his, to an adult estranged child. And when I read that, I thought, that would be incredibly unethical. You know, I should, actually verify this to make sure that I'm not like making a false allegation against this guy. Then I found a different Reddit post of someone saying that he also reached out to them and that this person actually met with him. This person says, he reached out to me a couple years ago at the request of my mother and asked for a Zoom call to discuss our estrangement. I hesitantly agreed to it, only with my therapist also on the call.
And honestly, though, it probably is unethical in terms of their work, in terms of their worldview. But on the other side of it, think if you're a counselor or a therapist and you truly want to figure out like who's in the right. Like you don't really know until you talk to the other person. And imagine maybe the person you're seeing is the narcissist. as a professional. And you talk to the family and you realize, oh my God, the person I'm seeing is actually the problem. This is something that Lundy Bancroft has done actually a lot. Now, the difference is he's not a licensed professional. He ran abuse groups for men, but he explicitly stated in his book that he would talk to the wives of the abusive husbands and boyfriends, and he would often hear a different side of the story. But it would tell the story. It would tell more of the truth, though. So this is a good crossroads here. If you're a licensed professional, I guess you can't even do it anyway. Like, you're just not allowed to do it, even though this guy did do it. But would you do it if it's helpful? I don't know. Dr. whatever his face here, he did seem to do it.
In the email, he stated he'd only seen my mother once. On the call, he indicated only ever talking to her, never seeing her, and even after sharing my story and our history, tried to pressure me to have a conversation with her. Obviously, I did not appreciate this. I struggle with boundaries, and it felt like he was exploiting this. My therapist and I had to basically both say no repeatedly before he finally gave up. I came away from the call frustrated and truly feeling like he is no expert in estrangement, but more in pressure and manipulation. You know, often a reason for estrangement. He was also super egotistical, would not recommend. So again, when I read this, I was like, oh my God, like, is this real? Like, did he actually do this? So I checked his website, which flat out states that he reaches out to adult children on behalf of his clients. Now, I'm not sure if I'm understanding this correctly. He charges $995 per 45-minute session. People are paying almost $1,000 for someone with the authority of a psychologist to reach out to their estranged child. Not to mention that, like, one session is not enough time to assess if your client is actually abusive. Though even after years of seeing them, I do not think this would be an appropriate thing to do. So let me just go through the different standards of the APA Ethics Code that this is violating. Standard 4.01 is all about maintaining confidentiality. When you have a client, you have a responsibility to maintain that client's confidentiality, including not confirming or disconfirming whether that person is your client. So basically, like, I would hope he has a sort of like written consent form for all of his clients, giving him permission to reach out to these adult children, because otherwise he'd be admitting to treating someone, which would be a huge breach of confidentiality. Let's assume he does have a written consent for this. That is like the bare minimum. Standard 10.01, informed consent to therapy. People need to provide informed consent to therapy. They need to understand what they are agreeing to it, and they need to do it willingly without any sort of coercion. Trying to essentially recruit someone into family therapy is the opposite of informed consent. It is beyond unethical to, in the first place, reach out to someone asking if they want to do therapy with you. Like, it would never be appropriate for psychologists to, for instance, start emailing people asking them if they want to do therapy with them. That is not how therapists do marketing, not ethical ones at least. But that is on a whole different level when you realize that the people he's reaching out on behalf of, these kids have explicitly stated they want nothing to do with.
Just a word of clarification, it would be okay for a therapist who's treating an individual to, for instance, say, hey, I think it might be helpful if we bring in this family member for a session or two. However, it would always need to come from the client themselves. It is not ethical or appropriate for the therapist to be reaching out to family members.
A therapist should be very aware that this is a form of triangulation, which is where a third party gets involved.
And she's absolutely correct about this. It would not be right for the therapist/professional to be reaching out without that client's permission. That's sneaky. Now, that might have been something that Lundy Bancroft did in those abuse groups. But again, I don't think he is held to this standard because he's not a licensed professional. So perhaps he was able to get away with it. I don't know how he did it, though. So I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I do know he did talk to the partners of the abusive men. Now, did they have permission? I don't know. I couldn't tell you that.
Sort of as a proxy to facilitate communication between two people, a third proxy who should not be involved in that relationship. Also, a decent therapist should be aware of the power and authority that a professional holds, and that can inadvertently coerce people into something they might not otherwise want to do, such as participating in this therapy session. Standard 3.05 dual relationship says a multiple relationship occurs when a psychologist is in a professional role with a person and at the same time is in another role with the same person or someone closely associated with that person. So by contacting the estranged adult child, he's essentially entering into a non-therapeutic relationship with a third party because his client is still the parent, not the child, in order to serve the best interests of his client. This is a textbook example of a harmful multiple relationship. Standard 3.06 conflict of interest. Psychologists refrain from taking on a professional role when personal, scientific, professional, legal, financial, or other interests could impair objectivity, competence, or effectiveness. Therapists don't typically do family or couples therapy with someone once they've had individual therapy with them because it's impossible to remain objective. Dr. Coleman is essentially putting himself in a dual loyalty conflict. Will he serve the parent's agenda or the autonomy and well-being of their child? When it's just the parent that he's in contact with, it's clear-cut where his loyalty lies. But once someone else ends the therapeutic picture, his role shifts from individual therapy to family therapy, and his priority at that point needs to be the well-being of the family system rather than the individual who hired him. This is a direct conflict of interest. Not to mention, family therapy, couples therapy is not recommended with abusers. So straight up guaranteeing to your client that I'm going to facilitate some sort of family therapy between you and your adult child, when you know that there's a high likelihood that that person might have allegations of abuse against them, is a big no-no. And standard 3.04, avoiding harm. Psychologists take reasonable steps to avoid harming their clients, students, research participants, organizational clients, and others. Reaching out to an estranged child where the likelihood is much higher that they experienced abuse at the hands of the person you're pressuring them into reconciling with has immense potential for emotional harm, especially when you've maybe only spoken to the client one time. So again, you really can't assess whether they're abusive or not. And especially when you're guaranteeing as part of a nearly $1,000 package that you're going to reach out to their adult child. So let's say that like based on that one session that you have with that parent, you determine, oh yeah, like they were probably abusive to their child because they straight up just admitted it. So are you then still going to reach out to their child for reconciliation? Or are you going to give them a refund because you can't actually follow through on what you promised them? Also, like, it's not clear to me based on his website how much of it is therapy and how much of it is coaching. Sometimes therapists will be licensed in a state or multiple states. And if they have a large social media presence, they will also try to circumvent licensing jurisdiction by offering coaching to people in other states where they're not licensed. And this is actually riskier for licensed professionals than it is for unlicensed professionals, because as an unlicensed professional, you can call whatever coaching and offer it to people, and basically there's no like governing body to hold you accountable. But when you're a licensed professional, there is a governing body to hold you accountable if you do something that's unethical. And basically what I was taught as part of a continued education course that I took on this, if it looks like therapy and it smells like therapy and it quacks like therapy, you're doing therapy, right? So it doesn't mean if you call it coaching or therapy, if you're practicing outside of your licensure and like any reasonable person can look at that and be like, yeah, you're doing therapy, then that's not ethical because you're not licensed in that state.
Specifically, what on his website Dr. Coleman calls coaching includes providing psychological assessment, like when he says he's diagnosing the problem, background questions that are pretty typical of what you might find in a therapy intake, family sessions in which the goal is relational reconciliation, and treatment planning when he says things like make recommendations about strategies. These typically fall under the domain of psychotherapy or counseling, which means that the practitioner must be licensed where the client is located.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think some of that stuff could be considered coaching because, like, if you're working towards goals and like plans, like if you can't do that in coaching, then it's like, what can you do in coaching if that's considered therapy, if that's considered counseling? I don't know if I like that. Gouging. Yeah, she is, or he is, I should say. Correct. No one wants to really. I know I wouldn't. Rhodes says, I wish Salerno wouldn't make unverifiable claims about his book being required reading at Quantico. Sounds grifty, unfortunately. Did he? I know they said, I thought it was a police force. Wasn't there a police force that was required reading of his? Or are you saying he made it up? Because I did read that. I did read that it was required. He had a book fit for duty. I don't know what technically it was required for. Or maybe he's broadened the definition of required, maybe. Dr. Solano's work is intense to me. He's very compassionate and empathetic, but it's scientific and creeps me out to think we might be dealing with literal psychopaths. All right, it's understandable. His website says all FBI students have to read his book. And you're saying they don't have to? Is that what you're saying? Or you couldn't verify that that's the way it is? Yeah, let me know. See, I guess that's tricky then, right? Like, how would you go about verifying that? You got to call Quantico, ask the behavioral analysis unit, like, hey, you guys have to read his book.
Labeling these things coaching doesn't change that.
Anyway, that's a little bit of background on Dr. Coleman, but back to what he was actually saying in the introduction. I found it really interesting that in his introduction, Dr. Coleman claimed that therapists often call their clients' parents narcissist or borderline, sort of implying that therapists are pushing their adult children to go no contact by pathologizing these parents who they've never actually met.
Therapists are sort of greenlighting a lot of estrangements, particularly when you use language like, oh, your mom's a narcissist, or your dad's a borderline, or they're a sociopath, they're gaslighting you, or they're a boundary crosser. And once you say that to somebody, once you tell somebody that their parent or their family member or their child is that way, you just greenlit them cutting them off. Because now it's a virtuous act of protecting your mental health. I think that's a problem.
The reason I find this so interesting is because on his own website, Dr. Coleman says, as part of this $1,000 package, he will assess the role of mental illness or other challenges in your child as contributing factors to your estrangement, both when they were young and since entering adulthood. Assess the role of ADHD, learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, gender identity issues, and political differences as contributing factors to your estrangement, both when they were young and since entering adulthood. I believe in the field of therapy, this is what we call projection. It seems to me like Dr. Coleman thinks therapists diagnose their clients' parents because he's the one speculating on his clients' children who he's never met before.
Honestly, that can probably go both ways too, honestly. And I've seen this in therapists on Instagram, etc., where there's a debate. Because some will say, is it ethical to ask your therapist who they voted for? And some licensed professionals say, yeah, you better believe it. Because for example, some of the progressive therapists will say, yeah, you don't want to go get help from anyone that voted for Trump. You don't want to go get help from someone that wants to take women's rights away. So that's where the debate lies, right? And so I see both sides of it. I can see both sides of that fence kind of being a little bit wild. And there's debate amongst the professionals about this, by the way.
Same page, he also promises he can help you assess the role of others in your estrangement, such as ex-spouses, sons or daughter-in-law, or other family members, because as we all know, when an adult child chooses to go no contact, it's often the case that somebody is brainwashing them into doing it because they can't think for themselves, poor dummies.
Oh, and he'll also evaluate the role of your child's therapist in causing the estrangement, and he will tell you the relative importance of prior, quote mark, mistakes you've made in the relationship.
This is interesting that she's going over this. So what does this sound like? It sounds like this Coleman character, it almost sounds like he's a conservative and he's trying to figure out what those leftist therapists that told them to cut their parents off, those bastards. And perhaps the leftist therapist would say the same thing about the conservative therapist, perhaps.
Anyway, Coleman talks about how his daughter cut him off for a while, and he admits he reacted defensively, but that he needed to take responsibility for the kernel of truth in what she said. So now I guess they're reconciled in kumbaya. Moving on from Dr. Coleman, Oprah also invites on her show Dr. Gibson, the author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, which is a wonderful book, highly recommend it. And Oprah asks her what I think is a pretty loaded and misguided question as to whether she encourages people to cut off their family members. And Dr. Gibson immediately assures her that is not the case, as any ethical therapist will assure you.
And when you say to someone, or do you say to them, perhaps you should go no contact?
Yeah, I don't say that.
You don't say that.
I don't say that.
She says actually she doesn't even use clinical terms in her work with adult children. She stays away even from the term emotionally immature in her therapy work, sort of dispelling this stereotype that therapists who are helping adult children process through these issues are somehow pathologizing and diagnosing their parents and like actually advising them to cut contact with them. I'm sure there are some unethical therapists who do that, but I definitely think they're in the minority because that is a big no-no according to the entire AP ethics code. Nedra,
And so that's why she would probably hate all of us narcissistic abuse people, because a lot of us will tell you, yeah, it's probably not the best to stick around in situations like that. But this is where the difference lies, right? It's just, to me, it's one of the reasons why the people that are licensed professionals, they can't always help as effectively because of these guidelines. Like, these guidelines are like her Bible. And granted, they're there for a reason. But sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I think they do get in the way.
Glover Tawwab, another therapist and the author of Drama Free, was also invited. And honestly, I didn't take a lot of notes on what she said just because she was sort of middle of the line on this discussion. I agreed with most of what she said. Next, Oprah shifts gear into talking to adult estranged children, starting off with a man who talks about his estrangement from his parents. He said he started dating his girlfriend. His family didn't like his girlfriend. Once they got engaged, his family really started escalating in their feelings and their attempts to control his life. They started trying.
So it says in 2024, she's 27. Oh, how the heck did she get a doctorate so young at 27? I guess it's technically possible when you're 25, 26, I guess. I consider her a good one, though. She's trying to empower and give the client agency to reach that conclusion on their own. Yeah, makes sense. There is an agenda everywhere to divide us in all possible ways also. Also true. I'm pregnant too, huh? I didn't know that either. She's 27 now, maybe 28 now. So I imagine a doctorate takes between bachelor's, master's, and whatever, 8 to 10 years. So, but that's why she leans on the book stuff here, right? If you're missing in life experience, you want to lean on the credential stuff. Me, I'm the opposite. So I'm heavy in the experience, so I lean on that. So that's my selling point. Her credentialed stuff is her selling point. And so don't get me wrong. If I'm her, I probably lean into what she's leading into as well. She could have started at 17. My daughter started college at 16. Yeah. Yeah, that used to happen even more back in the day. We used to graduate high school early or do the AP courses early. Absolutely. So I guess she married. Is she married or has a boyfriend, I guess? Let's see.
Deleting, inviting his friends to lunch with them, asking about how to delay and cancel the wedding. Were not happy once they got married, and then reacted really poorly to his wife getting pregnant with their first child, and that they had conversations about it, but they were not able to repair in the way that they had hoped. Oprah's questions seem a little bit leading here. She asks things like, where did you get the idea of the estrangement? And did you talk about it first? To me, sort of like hinting at like these stereotypes that when adult children choose to go no contact, it's because they saw it on the internet or because they lack conflict resolution skills and they weren't able to talk about it first, both of which this guy dispelled were not factors for him. He also mentioned that his wife was estranged from her family because she was disowned for religious reasons. Now, after they share their story, Dr. Coleman warns the couple against modeling to their own kids to just cut your parents off during conflict.
Are presenting your children with a role model of how to handle conflict. And that's a concern. You are showing them that people can be cut out of your life. And so that is a role model, because I'll sometimes work with a parent who will say, well, you did it, Mom. You cut out your grandma, so why can't I cut out you? So I mean, an adult child. So
he's playing devil's advocate, but it doesn't matter. Like, if someone deserves to be cut off, they deserve to be cut off. It doesn't matter what people have done before them. Like, everyone has to be their own person and make their own decisions. But she's going to say, yeah, he's like leading the witness here and telling them to like be careful with what they show their child. But I would also argue they're showing their child the right thing. That, yeah, if someone refuses to respect you, absolutely you walk away in those cases. So I don't know what point he's trying to make here with this. He's probably just trying to score a point with the narcissistic parents of the world.
Have to be very mindful of every layer of this.
I didn't really see how this was relevant because, again, the guy literally said estrangement was a last resort for them, something that they tried having discussions about first. So it wasn't like this was the first thing they tried. And Dr. Gibson actually responds with exactly what I was thinking in that moment, which is you're not modeling, hey, just cut off your parents. You're modeling that it's okay to walk away from people who have mistreated you. You as a parent should not be worried about that.
Sounds like me.
Right? Like if you're modeling to your kids, don't stick around when people mistreat you. Why are you worried about that? You know, like, are you going to mistreat your kids? Because that's the only situation in which you should be worried about what you're modeling.
Oh,
Yes.
I've thought about that. I think you will try, knowing what you all do about the importance of your inner subjective experience as being an individual. You're going to pass that on to your child. That what people make you feel inside matters. Okay. And that has to be taken into account. It's not a solution just to cut somebody out for no reason, of course. But if there are reasons, there are people that the role model that you're becoming is if there are people that are harmful to you emotionally, you do have the right to keep as much distance, maybe not total cutoff or whatever. You have the right to decide the optimal distance that you're going to have in your relationship with them.
Then there's another adult estranged child named Bree who talks about her own estrangement. She says she always knew she was going to go no contact, even as a child. And actually, it was her own mom who blocked her for standing up for herself. And she just kind of followed suit and, like cut off contact with her. For some reason, at this point, we switch back to Dr. Coleman, who cites a 2016 study to claim that what constitutes harm, abuse, trauma, and neglect have radically expanded.
There was a study done in 2016 which showed that our ideas about what constitutes harm, abuse, trauma, and neglect have radically expanded in the past 3 decades. Radically expanded.
Now, the way he phrases it, Dr. Coleman makes it sound like there was a study in 2016 showing his point. The study it seems like he's referring to is not an empirical study. It's basically an academic opinion piece on concept creep. The article says, I contend that the expansion primarily reflects an ever-increasing sensitivity to harm, reflecting a liberal moral agenda. Its implications are ambivalent, however, although conceptual change is inevitable and often well-motivated.
And this part sounds like what she was saying in the previous video too, about the same word trauma, where if everything's trauma, nothing's trauma. If everything's anxiety, nothing's anxiety. Let's see what she concludes.
Concept creep runs the risk of pathologizing everyday experience and encouraging a sense of virtuous and impotent victimhood. So, yeah, it was considered normal in the past to abuse and neglect your children. This article claims that emotional abuse and neglect as abuse are new expansions to the definition of abuse. It claims that emotional abuse is often subjective. I think most victims of abuse will tell you that the physical aspect of abuse that they've experienced isn't usually the worst part. Wounds close, bruises heal, but the worst part about both physical and emotional abuse is the psychological scarring that follows. The way you can no longer trust your own judgment, your own memory, your sense that the world is a safe place. Most people, I think, would rather just be punched in the face than have their self-esteem peeled apart layer by layer systematically over years.
I don't even know why people need to compare them. I think they're all bad in their own ways. Everyone always has to do like what's worse. They're all bad.
Like, I remember one time as a kid, an adult slapped me on the face. And while, yeah, I was startled in that moment, that memory is nothing to me compared to some of the emotional things that I've experienced in my life. Also, although it's true that human behavior is always experienced through a person's subjective lens, mental health professionals can still spot emotional abuse a mile away. There's a very high degree of inter-rater reliability when mental health professionals are deciding, is this emotional abuse or not? So I'm not quite sure why these two men are making it sound like it's just so hazy and impossible to.
I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of mental health professionals that seem to miss it. At least according to all the antidotes that I see on the channel here, and people talk about their experiences in couples counseling with the narcissist. They fooled the therapist, this, and this. So it's like, is it so cut and dry as she says? They all see it from a mile away? Doesn't seem like it. Doesn't seem like it.
determine what emotional abuse is. We actually have very standardized methods of assessing for it. For example, the psychological maltreatment inventory has items assessing for things like yelling and screaming, insulting, belittling, and name calling, mocking and humiliating, criticizing in a devaluing way, isolating from other people, denying abusive behaviors, telling the other person that their feelings are wrong, blaming the other person, making the other person feel responsible for their emotions. Right? Like in the field of psychology, it's very clear to us what we're talking about when we talk about emotional abuse.
Also to note, I think there's also many older professionals that are kind of stuck in their ways and they don't maybe stay up to date as they should. Because it seems like, okay, if a therapist puts other person's behavior through that lens, you'd think they should be able to know, right? But yet, there's still all these people out there that say they haven't been helped. So where's the disconnect here? I guess the only way to truly figure this out would be to ask those people who have been to those places, what happened here? Why weren't they able to help you?
Do you agree with Haslam's point that concept creep has diluted the meaning of words like trauma, particularly online when used by lay people who don't fully understand the words they're using rather than by professionals? But that should never be used as a reason to invalidate people who have made the extremely difficult decision to cut off literal family members, because I don't know a single person who takes something like that lightly. And also, if your child does go no contact with you because of a trend or to like fit in with internet culture, I feel like you probably have made a few mistakes in parenting them anyway. So back to the estranged children, we then hear from a different Bree who decided to go no contact.
And so also to note, as I've said, there's such a thing as narcissistic adult kids as well. And just because someone's a narcissist doesn't mean both of their parents are also narcissists too. It can mean that. It can mean at least one of them is, but not always. So if you have a kid who is a narcissist, and then maybe both of their parents are not, for sake of argument, and they're just normal humans, and they have boundaries, and they're assertive with their narcissistic kid. And since the kid is the narcissist, although they're an adult now, they get furious. And so they cut off their parents. Or maybe if there's grandkids, they withhold their grandkids from their non-narcissistic parents because they want to punish them. That happens a lot. And all it takes is a different opinion sometimes for that to happen. Throughout my family, I've seen that several times. There's women that, so there's the guy in our family, right? His wife withheld their kids from the male family members of mine's parents. And observing the situation, the woman was out of control in this situation. She was more narcissistic, and she just convinced the kid, like my cousin, yep, we're cutting them out. But in reality, the woman was a little out of hand in that case. But it's just an example of just because someone's being cut off doesn't always mean they're the problem. Often it is. Does mean that, but just not always. And Dr. Salerno and I have mentioned this as well.
With her mom, and she talks about how her mom abandoned her family at 6 years old. She tried to have a relationship with her in college, and her mom ended up humiliating her at her graduation, hysterically calling an emergency.
So let me see something here. My golden child brother cut off my narc dad for 2 years. Narc children definitely do that. Yeah. And in that case, the dad was narcissistic too, right? But there's other times when they'll cut off the parent that's not a narcissist. But I'm glad you mentioned that too, Thrive. That's exactly the point I'm making. Rhodes says, Jared, did you know that Salerno was only ever licensed to practice as an LMFT, never as a licensed psychologist? Are you sure about that? If so, I did not know that. Because he doesn't say that. He says he's a psychologist. Or a retired psychotherapist, I think is what he says, right? I was disappointed to discover this given the way he frames his expertise. I see. Where did you learn that, Rhodes? My golden child brother is narcissistic. Yeah, a lot of golden children are. Not always, though, right? Just because someone's a golden child doesn't mean they'll be 100% a narcissist, but often they can be. Looked up his licenses in California. LMFT is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Do you see grandparents get cut off more often when the parents themselves are also in conflict versus when the parents are united? That's a good question. Usually what happens is, say there's a narcissistic person in a relationship. Now, depending on their partner, right? Their partner might be someone that just kind of goes along with everything. So it doesn't seem like there's conflict. But the only thing that's preventing the conflict is that other person doesn't stand up for themselves. So the other person doesn't have boundaries, doesn't say no, doesn't speak up. So it doesn't seem like there's conflict, but the one person is narcissistic. Usually all that is required is a toxic / narcissistic person, and one thing rubs them the wrong way, and they're gone, baby, gone. That's what I've seen. I mean, hey, it's good for everyone to do their due diligence on everyone. I can't say that's a bad thing to do. Right? I mean, and we'll see. We'll see what he says. We'll see what the things say. I'm sorry, I have a flying monkey brother. He was always weird. Flying monkey brother. Tell him to go see the Wicked Witch of the West. Always appeasing to avoid conflict. Correct. That's the enablers, people pleasers, people with CPTSD. That's what they'll do. I mean, you see that a lot with the quote unquote, the man that's with a narcissistic woman. The narcissistic woman is in charge and they're an appeaser. And women can be an appeaser too, don't get me wrong, with the narcissistic men.
Be in front of everyone and like causing a scene when all she was trying to communicate was like, me and my boyfriend need to leave, actually. And Brie talks about how she hears from a lot of people, you only have one mother, and the effect that that sort of guilting has on her. And she and the panel of experts talk about acceptance as like a form of forgiveness, how like forgiveness can look like simply accepting that like this is the person you're dealing with. So then we move on to the estranged parents, starting with Christy, who I actually recognize from her TikToks. Oprah plays one of her TikTok videos where she calls BS that kids go no contact to protect themselves. And she goes into listing things that parents do for their kids, which is so classic.
Your children are not estranging from you to hurt you. They're doing it to protect themselves. I call BS. What are they protecting themselves from with us? Loving parents who've always supported them, loving parents who's always done everything in their power to be there for them, who financially has supported them, who has went out of their way and put their life on the back burner for their kids. What are they protecting themselves from?
Guess what? I have flaws. What are they? Oh, I don't know. I sing in the shower. Sometimes I spend too much time volunteering. Occasionally, I'll hit somebody with my car.
I actually recognize Christy. I think I've reacted to one of her TikToks. I think a lot of her TikToks come off pretty defensive, pretty tribal, sort of creating this divide between parents and children in estrangement. She's actually made a video montage in which she shows her estranged daughter's face. People can easily find her username from her page. She shares a lot about her estrangement on her page in a way that to me feels like a little bit violating of her daughter's privacy. And actually, I watched a podcast episode that Codependency Kate did interviewing her estranged daughter. In that episode, her daughter flat out said like she's really uncomfortable with how publicly her mom has spoken about their estrangement. She wants nothing to do with it. She's tried to like block certain words, set boundaries with people who are bringing those videos to her attention.
The elephant in the room now is that your estranged parent is posting online about the estrangement, about you, like in a way. And I say that because like revealing your face, revealing your.
So that's the woman that's cut off, the woman in green from the Oprah show. So as a professional face reader, she doesn't look like a toxic person at all. She looks like, if anything, would be more of a people pleaser. Unlike her mother's got that toxic-ish face. So That's just a very superficial judgment. Dr. Anna would get very angry at me for that superficial judgment. It's not evidence-based. There's no studies to back it up, but that's what I say about the face.
Right? Like your username or, right? Like, when did that start?
Right as I moved out, probably like a month or so after, in terms of just like tiny little Facebook things here and there. I think for me, it was just kind of just like, at first I was like, why? Just like shake my head, like, why are we doing this? Like anger, just like, why? Why take, this is bad enough between the two of us. Why do we have to do this on the internet? Right? Like, I don't understand. Like, I had so many questions. It's like, why are we doing this? And as time went on, like, it started to hurt a little bit. Then it was like, at first I was like mad, and then I was like hurt. And then like, as I worked through therapy, and then even as I got out of therapy, there's still some things that like, you know, I would get sent from people. I'm like, I get to the point, I'm like, stop.
And that her mom would need to stop talking about it publicly if she wanted to repair the rupture between them.
I feel like it's at a point where it is like, there's a lack of privacy now, like you had just said. And I said, I feel like every single time a video is posted or information about this is posted, or a negative remark about me as an individual is posted, it's a whole nother week.
And so listen to her talk here. Does this seem like the kind of person that's toxic? And just trust your gut here for a minute. I just don't get that vibe from her at all. I don't get the emotionally unsafe vibe. The, oh no, she's right about to be antagonistic, condescending, belittling, gaslighting. No, I get none of that vibe from her. Seems like a really chill person. And to imagine what her mother had to have done to her to get her to the place where she felt like she had to go no contact with her, seems like she just needs a hug, this person here, because it sucks. It sucks to have a mom like that. And you could see it. You could sense the emotional unsafety. Is unsafety a word? Lack of safety. You can sense the lack of safety in her mother, where it's just like, oof, I wouldn't like it one bit.
That we're going to go, right? Because I have put the time and effort to forgive and to understand why. And I have pumped so much energy into myself, into my own, you know, mental health and well-doing and life changes. And I just want that to occur. And I want her to, you know, heal. And I want her to forgive. And I want her to heal. And I want her to feel, you know, like acceptance of the situation.
Also, I noticed in one of her recent videos, Christy is responding to one of the comments on her video, saying she also thought it was a red flag that the wife of the first estranged adult child is also no contact with her family. And I was just kind of confused by that because, like, I remember seeing in the podcast that woman specifically say she was disowned by her family for religious reasons.
Because are you speaking to your parent? You're not speaking to your parents either?
No.
Why aren't you speaking to your parents?
I grew up in a very religious household. And when I became an adult and was not necessarily having some of the same morals and values and political beliefs and religion, they basically disowned me.
Okay. They disowned you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why would Christy, who is actually there, not remember that? It just seems like it's again going on this stereotype of like, oh, it must have been the new woman he married who's actually to blame for him going no contact with his family, when like the wife literally said, like in front of our eyes, that she was not the one who chose to go no contact with her family. She was disowned for religious reasons. So there's just like a lot on Christy's page that I'm like, I don't know about this. But in the Oprah episode specifically, Christy says that it was a few estrangements and then they reconnected really well. And then finally, her daughter cut her off over something so minor.
It was something so minor.
And like, this is very vague, of course. And Oprah challenges her to be a little bit more specific about what was the one little thing. And again, Christy cannot be specific and just says she just didn't get her way.
The reason we are not talking now, it was such a little thing. We all are wondering what little thing was that? What was that? And you know what? I was going to say, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Maybe it was a little, obviously, it was a little thing to you, but it wasn't a little thing to her.
It was something she didn't get her way.
Okay.
She didn't get her way.
She says she asked to talk to her daughter. Her daughter also cut off other family members. If you watch the podcast episode that Codependency Kate actually did with her daughter, you will hear her daughter talking about how when they reconnected, she still didn't quite feel like she could be herself because of the way her mom had initially reacted to her coming out as lesbian as a teenager.
And it just felt like, I just couldn't be what the relationship she wanted it to be between us. Like I just couldn't offer that, right?
And what does that sound like? It sounds like, sadly, a narcissistic mother, or I say narcissistic. Like when I say narcissistic, I'm not saying NPD. And you could say I'm closer to saying a narcissistic operating system, but that's not even a diagnosis. But that's just what I think is important. But it sounds like she has a narcissistic mother that had an ideal of what she wanted her daughter to be like, but her daughter being lesbian was not part of that ideal. So what happened? She began to belittle her, devalue her, probably triangulate her with other girls and say, why can't you be more like her? Why can't you be more like the Barbie doll? Why can't you be more like this? And what does that make her think? What does that make her feel? It makes her feel like she can't truly be herself if she's around her mother. And so what happens? She probably starts to self-abandon. She probably has to pretend to be someone she's not around her to keep the peace. It probably feels like she has to walk on eggshells and she has to hide who she really is. And who wants that? Who wants that? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to have, especially with a mother-daughter relationship. I mean, mother-daughters can be super close or they can be pretty much enemies. And it seems like they have more of the latter here. But the pieces of the puzzle are coming together here, right? As you see this side of the story, and then you see the way her mother was acting on that show. There's a reason why that mother deleted her TikTok. Let's put it that way.
Like it was just so hard for me. I was never being somebody that I wasn't or faking a relationship, right? But it was just like, I'm scared of having that again.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of like you had internalized maybe just by nature before that you had done something wrong, or that your coming out had caused this rift between the two of you. And so you're saying like when you're more of an adult, even on your own, even being yourself, even being more secure in your life, that it still felt like, oh my gosh, what if I do something wrong and get kind of abandoned again, get rejected again? Is that what you're saying? That like just on an emotional level?
Yeah, just like on an emotional level, just being scared of something like me saying the wrong thing or us getting into an argument or us getting into a fight and then we're going to be estranged for a year or two again, not going to talk. And then I wasn't going to have a motherly relationship with her again.
Okay.
Right.
And then basically she just started to shut down more and more. And her mom kept asking her to talk about it. And when she couldn't do it, her mom basically gave her 4 or 5 days to leave the house, kicked her out essentially.
And, we had shared some words about some things, and after that, it was continuously I want to talk about this, 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 and I was just avoidant. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Back to I don't want to risk another blow up. I don't want to risk another estrangement. I don't want to risk another time in my life where I don't have a good relationship with this part of my family. And I was just avoidant.
And what does it sound like? Walking on eggshells, not being able to be yourself, having that anxious feeling, dreading having to be around them, having to mentally prepare herself just to deal with her mother. Those are all the signs that, at the very least, not an emotionally safe person. But when you're not with an emotionally safe person, that will almost always lead to disconnection. Emotional safety leads to disconnection, leads to, at the best, dishonest harmony. Bing, bang, boom.
Wanting to get out of it, and eventually that ended up in me just I wouldn't talk about it. And she made it clear you're not going to talk about it type thing, and I wasn't going to share and I wasn't going to sit down and talk about it, that I had to move out. And I was forced out. I had like 4 or 5 days to get out, and I was like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
And she also said that like her mom sent her a message when like an uncle died, and the daughter was saying like she wanted to just sit on it for 24 hours before responding. And when she did eventually respond, her message showed up green. So she thinks maybe her mom blocked her or something when she didn't immediately respond.
And I sat on it for 24 hours and then eventually responded, kind of just kept it short and sweet to the point of just like, hey, I hate to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that. My condolences to you all and the family and anybody's life that, he touched, that's kind of like kept it short, sweet. And I think my no response for 24 hours kind of like deteriorated the conversation, because when I had sent a text message, it just went green. So I'm assuming like I kind of got blocked, maybe just like didn't respond quick enough, whatever it may have been. I don't know if the message was sent and then immediately blocked, so I got it but couldn't respond, or what the what's behind that.
So, there are definitely some inconsistencies between the way Christy is framing it and the way her daughter is framing what actually happened during the estrangement. And I also thought it was really interesting how Christy kept coming back to this idea that she knows I'm a good person. A lot of us are really good parents. We aren't deserving of this.
And it's a good point, comparing and contrasting how the two of them spoke about it. And that's one thing I've seen a lot of narcissistic people do, is I know I'm such a good person. I know I'm this. I know I'm that. It's like, are you sure? Are you sure? And what makes you so sure? Because what is that saying, basically? It's a lack of humility. It's a lack of humility to not even think to ask yourself, maybe I'm just not as good of a parent as I think I am. Maybe maybe not even as good of a person as I think I am. And it takes that level of humility to even ask that of yourself. But so often, the question never gets asked. And that's one of the cool things about AA and NA. It forces you to accept those things. It forces you to accept some not so flattering things about yourself. I would not be who I am today without those things. It was my introduction to it. I was in my early 20s. I was not very good at it before that. But I see now it was an absolutely necessary part of my growth and part of my development. And you just see there's a lot of people that they never start a program of growth. They're never forced to. Now, granted, force is the right word for me, because my life went so far off the rails that I was going to die. And so I was put in a position where, well, if I don't do something different, I'm going to be dead. So I got there. I did it. And pain pushed me there, but I still did it.
She goes into how her boys reassure her all the time that she's not a bad mom.
I'm a mom of 3. They reassure me all the time, Mom, you're not a bad mom.
It sounds to me like this knee-jerk defense against shame, to like want to reassure yourself that you're actually a good person, you're a good parent. And like as a parent myself, I just don't really understand this, to be honest. When I inadvertently cause my child suffering by like, sometimes it could be like blowing my nose too loudly and it'll like scare my baby. I feel awful. I feel like, oh my God.
And that's the thing. When you see people say that, I'm such a good person, I'm such a good person, you have to think, who are they trying to convince? It's almost like they're trying to convince themselves, because to admit anything but that would be catastrophic to them. Or, depending how severely narcissistic they are, maybe they just don't even think it. They just think, no, I'm great. Of course I'm great. Which means, of course I'm a great parent. I can't even think but to think anything but that. But no, it's that level of arrogance and lack of humility. Watch out for that. And if anything, her daughter, when you see her, she's got tons of humility. She's got tons of just good vibes. She's got some grace. That's what it seems like to me.
I am responsible for my child's suffering. And that's over something obviously like as unintentional and minor as like blowing your nose. I can't imagine with like something larger, with like your child actually coming to you and saying, you caused me pain and suffering when you did this. How as a parent you could be so much more preoccupied with preserving a positive self-image than with the suffering that you've caused your child. I just don't understand that. And also Christy keeps saying, I feel like my daughter lacks conflict resolution skills. And she later admits that she probably didn't teach it enough in her household. She asks the experts how to teach conflict resolution skills. On Codependency Kate's podcast, her daughter also confirms like, yeah, she does have an issue with like shutting down when things get heavy. She did feel like there were a lot of things swept under the rug growing up. And also I just keep thinking about like how she didn't feel safe growing up to come out as a lesbian. And that probably shaped her approach to conflict to quite a large degree of like when there's something important and vulnerable that's on her mind, she probably just sort of defaults to hiding away that part of herself because it feels safer. Now, Christy also talks about how so many parents don't even get the opportunity to talk about it. And I don't believe that this is true in the majority of cases because people have a tendency to distort things when they're remembering them. And there are so many testimonials of estranged children saying, I told my parent in words and voicemails and writing, like in all these different ways that I even have proof of sometimes. And my parent still claims that I never communicated to them what needed to change. However, this did make me wonder if maybe the opposite could sometimes also be true, that sometimes estranged children think they've communicated to their parents, but maybe haven't done a very good job of it where they don't even realize it. Also, I think, listen, like in a minority of cases, I do think sometimes adult children go no contact with their parents without warning and without explanation. For example, I came across this TikTok video soon after watching Oprah's podcast.
I blocked my mother on everything without conversation or warning the other day. Like literally every way that she could possibly contact me, blocked on all of them. I didn't warn her, didn't tell her, didn't let her know like, hey, this is what's happening because I don't care. I don't care to let her know, right? Because like I spent a whole lifetime being hurt by this woman. And there comes a transition period sometimes for some of us, for the unfortunate few, where you go from thinking your parents just kind of a little messed up and like need some help to, oh, this is not a safe person. This is not a good person for me to be around. I realize that like if I ever have children, I do not want my children around this woman. If I ever have a partner, I don't want them to meet this person. Like I don't want them in my life at all. I don't want them part of my future, part of my life. Like when I think about a peaceful life, they are not in it. And so I thought, why do I have them? Literally, why? Like to keep the peace? Whose peace am I keeping? Hers, not mine.
So I don't know how you feel about the TikTok I just showed, but like for me personally, do I think it's the best course of action to just cut off a parent without explanation? No, I think generally speaking, it's a good idea to explain it to them first. But there are definitely many situations where that is the safer approach, where like if you are aware that like, hey, this person is violent, this person has never shown the capacity for self-reflection or change, this person has time after time responded.
Yeah, and I mean, depending on the situation, depending on who you're cutting off, I don't always say for people to have a conversation with them. For some people, it's just not even worth it. They're going to turn it into a debate or some big fight, or it might even become physically unsafe. And in those cases, you don't need to have a conversation. You just do what's best for you. Other times, if you truly think it'll be worth your while, okay, you can. But it just depends. It depends on the situation.
In extremely harmful ways when I've tried to bring issues to them. I don't think it's a hate crime to just cut them off without an explanation, if that's the case. If you as a person do not come across as someone that can be reasoned with, then you can't expect people to reason with you before cutting you off. So I think there's just like no blanket statement that applies to this topic. It's not like, well, kids always discuss this with their parents and always give an explanation, or kids never give an explanation to their parents. It's probably like a variety of situations. In a lot of situations, these kids did try to communicate to their parents in one way or another. Some of them went on to give one last explanation before cutting them off. Some of them did not. Some of them never felt safe. Some kids probably could have done a better job communicating themselves. Some adults are completely misremembering and distorting the fact that their kids did communicate to them. There's a variety of situations, but I think at the end of the day, we need to remember that it takes a lot for a child to completely cut off their parent. That is not something that anyone I know takes lightly. Then we hear from Kendall, who is estranged from her son by choice. And she expresses that she's kind of wounded by how people in the crowd are nodding along, agreeing with the estranged children.
And so, mostly Dr. Anna, I'll tell you, I agree with most things that she says. A couple things I didn't like necessarily, but other than that, like, she does mostly know her stuff, and she's a good resource, I would say, for the most part.
But not so much when Christy's telling her story.
Yes, I am estranged from my 30-year-old son by choice. And what I do notice, even in the room, when the children were speaking, people were kind of nodding and agreeing with them. But the moment Christy started telling her side of the story, people were kind of like, you know what I'm saying? My platform speaks similar to hers on behalf of the parent, because parents are suffering in silence. And when children become estranged, they are celebrated, they're supported, people rally behind them. But when their mother decides to go no contact with her child, she's demonized. And that's been my experience.
First of all, I think, that might have to do more with Christy's specific situation rather than Christy being sort of like a representative of all estranged parents. But yeah, I definitely see how people might be harsher on parents who decide to go no contact than on kids. And I suspect that Kendall has received a lot of judgment for her own choice and has a lot of shame regarding that, and is probably hypervigilant to signs that she's being judged by other people. People tend to be harsher on parents who go no contact with their kids because they sort of expect unconditional love from a parent, which, like, to be clear, like, I don't agree with that. I think no one needs to accept abuse. If your child is being abusive to you, then you are well within your right to estrange yourself. Another reason is that, again, there's this power imbalance between parents and children. So sometimes it can kind of look like, I guess, punching down for a parent to sever ties with their child. And also, I think because people expect parents to take responsibility for what went wrong in the dynamic. And so if a parent is cutting off a child and saying, like, you are a problem child, in a lot of situations, people are like, okay, but like, how did you contribute to your child turning out that way? So Kendall shares how she has experienced all kinds of abuse from her son and that he continues to threaten her and her husband. Her situation seems very severe. And again, like, I do not fault her for deciding to cut contact with her son, not in the slightest. What I do wonder about is, again, how her son turned out that way, because I do not believe children are born violent. I'm certainly not suggesting necessarily Kendall was violent to him. It's
Not born violent. So what does that mean? It means that she believes more in, at the very least, an environmental triggering. There's an environmental moment that triggers certain things. So I don't think the environment needs to trigger it. I don't think that. I think it can be there. They can have less gray matter in the brain responsible for empathy. And a lot of it is just in the genes and DNA. I think that it's possible. And again, but here's the problem with this, right? It's very difficult to reduce down the denominators. The closest you can do is a lot of these twin studies. But ultimately, it's very difficult to separate the environment from the genetic component. So it's hard to study it very accurately.
Possible that, there was, a different parent that was violent, he got in with the wrong crowd at school, or maybe he experienced some sort of trauma outside the home. So it is not necessarily the parent's fault that a child turned out that way, but it is usually the parent's responsibility, because even when things happen outside the home, the parent is the one that kind of has to navigate that at home with the child. So while I personally don't see it as wrong that Kendall chose to cut ties with her child, I personally would, in her situation, probably want to take some sort of responsibility for the way my child turned out, even in a situation like that. My husband and I have sometimes shared with each other, if our child, wanted to estrange themselves or developed a personality disorder or whatever it may be, we would always wonder, even if we thought we were the loveliest parents, we would always want to be how did we contribute to the situation? Because you as the parent have a certain degree of power until hopefully the power sort of evens out. And then we hear from Aaron, who was estranged, then reconciled with one of his kids. He talks about how he thought he was a great dad, but later his daughter told him he was a helicopter parent and that he didn't listen to her. And he admits that, like, upon self-reflection, she was right. She ended up needing help enrolling for college, and he answered. And that's when she asked him.
And this is the guy, he took accountability for everything he did. And so it's not a coincidence to me that he actually has a good relationship now with his daughter. He took the most accountability, and what do you know? He had the best outcome.
To go to therapy together, and they did, and they both learned things that they could do better. So Aaron is an example of like a parent who was able to self-reflect, took accountability, and in the end reconciled with his daughter. Dr. Gibson also points out that self-reflection is what helped Aaron turn his situation around, and she also points out that sometimes people are perceived as intimidating to do conflict resolution with, because again, that power imbalance between parent and child is relevant here. Sometimes children just don't feel safe to speak up. Now, at this point, Oprah reveals that she recently had a friend who received a letter of no contact from her child, who thought everything was great between the two of them. They went bowling, had a good time, and then suddenly this letter comes in the mail.
I think this is so interesting. I have a friend who just went through is going through this with her daughter, and she said, we had gone out for Thai food and bowling.
Correct.
I thought everything was fantastic, and then I get a letter arrives in the mail telling me from this day forward, no contact. And she thought something had happened to her daughter. She thought like it was like that her daughter had been kidnapped.
Which kind of makes sense now why Oprah might have wanted to do this episode. And Oprah says, like, it's great that we're learning to protect our mental health, but have we gone too far? And like an interesting discussion arises again between her and the experts on the panel. Oprah has a good point that like when you raise your kids to just obey, they don't know how to talk to their parent when an issue comes up. If you just teach your kids because I said so, of course they're not going to know how to bring up an issue with you. Then we hear from Nurse Hadley, who is a hospice nurse. Oprah plays her TikTok in which basically she says she doesn't judge people who don't want to reconcile with their dying parent. She says from her experience, usually when parents want her to reach out to their adult children on behalf of them, it's because they want to guilt trip their child rather than actually wanting to apologize. And this was fascinating to hear. Fascinating and so sad to hear that for a lot of these parents, their dying wish is to manipulate their children. She said there was one person who seemed like they had a lot of regret and wanted to make amends. Their child didn't want to speak to them. And she was like, hey, if you want to write a letter, I can maybe try to forward it to your child. And that in the end, this person decided not to do it.
And this part, it always reminds me of the movie Magnolia. For those of you who haven't seen it, I recommend you watch it. But there's a lot of these kinds of scenes in there with death and etc. Deathbed scenes. And I guess if you're on your deathbed, I'd maybe want to speak to them myself if I were them, I guess, right? Why not? That's your goal here. Your goal here is you want them there. And in the movie Magnolia, Philip Seymour Hoffman, he's basically a hospice nurse for the guy who admitted being a piece of shit, basically, and cheating on his son's mother. Tom Cruise is his son in the movie. And Philip Seymour finds a way to contact Tom Cruise, the guy's son, and the guy comes over there. But by the time he comes over there, he's already basically nonverbal because he took morphine or something and he's going to be gone. So Tom Cruise's character has a little bit of a cathartic scene as she calls him a fucking cocksucker, as he calls him, because that's what the father would always say all the time. So Tom Cruise has a good cry about that.
Nurse Hadley talks about often how it's a form of control from the parents. One last hurrah, one last chance to exert power and control over their child. And I think it really just goes to show some people will never be able to self-reflect, not even on their deathbed. So the podcast closes with a word from the experts. Dr. Gibson says, listen, the ship has sailed regarding people caring about their inner experiences. It's no longer just about being respected for the role of being a parent. Now it's about actually having relationship skills if you want to maintain a relationship with your kids. Dr. Coleman gives us his take that too much is expected of parents these days, whatever. My thoughts on the episode overall, I thought it was irresponsible to frame this as a trend when it is often a very difficult position and a last resort for people. I think it's irresponsible to try to be neutral or play both sides when it.
So to go over that, I didn't like the labeling of it as a trend either. I would have not had a problem with her saying more people going no contact, more people estranging. I wouldn't have had a problem with that framing. In terms of Oprah being neutral, again, you have to take each situation individually. Depending on the situation, I might have a different opinion. So at first, neutrality does help the abuser. But once you find out the facts, then you will know who you're really supposed to be helping. Because if you're not neutral, but you choose wrong, well, now you're helping the abuser even more if you choose wrong. So that's where Dr. Salerno would say you got to be a scientist more than an advocate at first until you figure out what is what. So I didn't have this problem with the neutrality part. I had a problem when Oprah wasn't being neutral, when she was kind of covertly guilt tripping the guy by saying, where did you come up with this idea to go no contact? Like, you couldn't have come up with it yourself. Somebody had to have given you this idea. Now, to me, that was a covert guilt trip.
Comes to a topic where there are a lot of allegations of abuse, and to ask negative leading questions to people who have been mistreated by those supposed to uplift them. And I understand why a lot of people are now vowing to go no contact with Oprah. She built her platform in large part on awareness of abuse, trauma, mental health, focusing on self-empowerment, uplifting the underserved. So people are feeling a little bit betrayed that this neutrality is coming from her specifically, because I guess they wouldn't expect it from her. Because if someone who looks so warm and compassionate can look you in the face and clearly have some questions as to whether they believe your side of the story, it's a lot more damaging than someone like, say, Dr. Coleman, who's built his entire platform off of raising doubts about the validity of the adult children. It comes off a little bit as like, well, my trauma was real, but kids these days are exaggerating about their trauma. But at the end of the day, Oprah was never a mental health expert. She was just a highly charismatic person who opened up about her own trauma history and focused her brand on doing good. Making this episode, though, was a business decision for her because it's a very polarizing topic. You don't need to have your decision to go no contact with your parents validated by Oprah. Let me know what you thought about the podcast episode down below, and I'll see you soon.
So she's correct. You don't need your no contact decision to be validated by Oprah. The only way I would differ with Dr. Anna there is the cases of the narcissists cutting off their parents, where in that case, what would you then do, huh? No one wants to think about that, right? Everyone always acts like if someone's cutting off their parents, it just means that only one side is a problem. It means only one side is the problem, only one side's the narcissist. But guess what? Considering the genetic component, there's a fair percentage of cases where there's one in each generation. There's a narcissistic parent, and there could be one narcissistic child, if not more. I mean, that happens. But no one talks about that. But in those cases, how do you decide what is right? They're both disordered in that case. So what do you say? I mean, and this happens a lot in these dysfunctional family systems when there's more than one disordered person. That, to me, that just turns into chaos. And they like the chaos, though. A lot of them, they even like the fights. They like the chaos. They enjoy it. But it's interesting, right? We don't hear much about that. Kat says, I find we're open to have therapy, but parents aren't. Often true. Perhaps less true as time goes on, but still true. Jared, higher elevation here than you. Yes, this is true. 19 degrees colder. No heat. No heat. Oh. You got to bundle up there, Ellie. Awake, her internal experience may have differed from the experience you shared with her, so I'm not blaming you. Children have their own perspective, and there is a genetic component. Well said, To Thrive. I mean, each kid, despite the genetics and DNA, yes, they'll have their own temperament, but they might also perceive the environment a little bit differently as well. I think both of those are true. I think you are correct. I know. Crazy. Yeah, you are. This is, yes, late, unfortunately. because we have been going on here for 2 hours and 27 minutes. 20 degrees feels like 12 degrees. It's the wind, Ellie. It's the wind that makes it feel no good. I hate the wind. Your healing starts the day you stop explaining yourself or overanalyzing in your head. I'm guilty of this still. Yeah, and I think a lot of people are too, Thrive. I think. But it's just normal. It's normal in the beginning. And then time goes on and you stop doing it. And you don't even notice that you stopped doing it, but just slowly but surely, other things become more important. Slowly but surely, the pain subsides, and then other priorities take its place. That's what happens. At least that's what happened to me. And here's the other thing. I mean, I talk about this, and I still don't think of anyone in particular anymore. I used to. Like when I first learned about this, I would think about very specific people when I watched the videos. But now, I kind of just think of it more as generalized. I think, oh, well, narcissists in general. I don't really think about a specific narcissist in my life. What's shaking over there, crazy? I'm glad you found me. Better late than never, they say, right? Oops, 10 degrees, probably colder here. Yeah, that makes more sense. I could tell you what it says on my phone. It says the temperature is 29. It's 29 degrees where I am. Is it under 20 where you are? I like how you did that. Do that, Jared. It helped me do the same, seeing you do that. Oh, about the seeing a generalized instead of a specific. Yeah. I mean, that's been really helpful for me. Because if I was like still focusing on one person with it, that would not be good. I'd be stuck. 11 degrees Celsius. What is Celsius in Fahrenheit, Kat? No worries, Awake, but we're glad to have you here. We're about to wrap this up in a few minutes here anyway. But I'm glad you were here and provided your insights and shared with us tonight. We're all very grateful for that. Everyone's always allowed to share here, which is good. Yes, have a good night. What to say? I'll ask the old ChatGPT Tizzle. Fahrenheit to Celsius. Yes, you got it, Awake. Better late than never is true in many more ways than one. It's taken me 15 years to realize I'm married to a narcissist. Ooh, 15 years is a long time. 51.8, eh? So fairly mild. 20 degrees warmer. Yeah. Quick example, 0 is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius is 50, 20 degrees Celsius is 68, 25 is 77, 30 degrees Celsius is 86. It's weird how they do that, right? I tell myself that the cold air is keeping me young and strong as I get older and older. I think that's a good thing to tell yourself, Ellie. The more you say it, the more it becomes true. That's how I see it. I'm on the south coast of England. Are you by the English Channel, Kat? Are you by Land's End? Or are you on the Ireland, Scotland side? I know several people from England, Kat. Did you know? All right, that makes more sense. Then it's just about the wind then, Ellie, at that point. 43 in California? That cold? Holy mackerel. I've heard of Brighton. Where I am, Kat, there's a lot of places that are named after places in England. So there's Bristol, Levittown. What else? A City by the Sea. Sounds like a Led Zeppelin song. Or an Ernest Hemingway book, Old Man in the Sea. Or Led Zeppelin would say Down by the Seaside, which is a great beach song if you live in the States. You Brits, you don't really go to the beach, do you? Like, do people do that in England? I don't think they do. Unlike where I am, where it gets nice and toasty, could be 90, 95 degrees. You can rock and roll here, baby. Rock and or roll. Roll down the windows, listen to some music as you go to the Atlantic Ocean. Fun times. Well, it's wild how people can be connected here. That makes sense, Kat. When did they do that? 70s, 80s, 90s? Because now they're broken up. Roger Waters is separate than David Gilmour. Or you team Roger Waters, are you a team David Gilmour? Is it warm enough for the beach there? You must be in a desert, crazy, for the temperatures to fluctuate that much. Because 115 and humid would be out of control. But 115 and dry, that's a different story. How could Kat close her eyes when it's not even 12, it's not even 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time? Team Gilmour, did you watch him do his performance with Kate Bush of Running Up That Hill live? It's the only performance Kate Bush did of the song. Roger Waters is a well-spoken fella. David Gilmour doesn't do much. He did the synthesizer of Running Up That Hill on the little weird guitar. It's on YouTube. It's a great performance. Yeah, I thought so, crazy. It would have to be. You like it better? How about the covers? Do you like the covers of Placebo or the covers by Meg Bush? Not Meg Bush. The fuck's her name? Meg somebody? Meg Myers. That's who it is. Those are the three versions I know, besides the one that David Gilmour's in. So David Gilmour does that one with Kate Bush, and the other dude, the elevation 1,700 feet here above sea level makes it colder than New Jersey. Yeah, I can see that. I know it gets cold by like in Allentown, Pennsylvania, or by Pittsburgh. I used to go to school in West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia. It's fun times. Very, very chilly, though, in those mountains. I'll tell you that. He discovered Kate Bush when she was a teenager. Yes, David Gilmour did. Yes, he did. Wasn't for David Gilmour, we wouldn't know who Kate Bush is. I like Kate Bush. I don't really know much of her songs, though. I only know Running Up That Hill, really. But she's a legend, apparently. But ultimately, I really liked her message of the song. The message of the song is, yes, I think we do, Kat. Yes, we do. But the message of the song is that if men and women could switch places, they would learn that neither one of them have it as easy as the other one thinks. And that's honestly the message social media needs more than ever right now. Because especially on Instagram, man hating is in. And men do it, women do it, and they kill it. They kill it when they do it. And I was like, God damn. Like, I don't know if it's helping. It can help a little bit in the validation stage, but I don't know. I think they need a little Kate Bush in their life, Kat. Yeah, I'll probably be on tomorrow night, 2 Thrive. I got no... What day is this? Thursday? I might see if I can get a guest tomorrow night to join me. To see who. And Marcella or Kelly or someone. A last minute affair. We'll see. Or there's always more videos to break down too. I think so too, Thrive, but there's a lot of people that don't agree with us. I think they like the validation. I mean, because okay, it's validation, but they can also get the validation from here without the man hate. Rhodes is bad. Rhodes says, according to his licensure history, Solano tried restarting as a trainee in March, lasted less than 90 days, then canceled it and retired his LMFT. Looks like he crashed out and just quit, to be honest. I think partially what has happened with him is he didn't want to have to like adhere to the same rules anymore. And he wanted to just do his like coaching consultations and his workshops and whatever else he does. But yeah, I mean, I'll give you this, Rose. As he talks, you wouldn't think he was just an LMFT, right? You would think a psychologist of sorts, right? That's what you would think. An LMFT is a little bit different. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean what he says is wrong. It's just, I don't know what to say about that, actually. Yes, to thrive. That is exactly what happens. It's cathartic at first, and then it turns into a cesspool of hate, and then people stay stuck. And here's the thing, the creators, they're guilty too. I mean, I know what they're doing, especially these dudes that are doing it. I'm like, you bastards selling out men for likes and clicks and money. But it's probably like a drug to them at that point. All I gotta do is bash men and people will love it. But that's the thing with those guys, though. They're putting themselves on the pedestal. And then I bet you some of them behind closed doors are probably pretty wild. You know? Not too good. Well, he's retired now, Ellie. He's retired now, so I don't think he has any. Well, we'll see what he calls himself on Instagram. He said PsyD. Is a PsyD different than an LMFT? I think it is, right? PsyD's more than an LMFT. I've heard him tell a story about an MPD client scoffing at his PsyD as opposed to PhD. That couldn't have happened since he was an LMFT, inflating the story. I mean, I'm reading his Instagram right now. It says PsyD, pathological abuse expert, personality disorder specialist, author. Doesn't say anything about LMFT. So, yeah. Like an LMFT is equivalent to, say, a licensed professional counselor or a licensed clinical social worker in America. They're equivalent credentials. Different, but equivalent. So you got a PsyD from an online private. Yeah, so that's another good distinction then, right? The PsyD is really just the education as opposed to a license, right? So someone who's a clinical psychologist is a little bit different. PsyD, Doctor of Psychology, is a professional doctorate focused on applying psychological principles to clinical practice, preparing graduates for careers as therapists. Yeah, so I think it's the educational aspect of it. Well, I don't even know. I'm not sure. Counselors or organizational consultants, unlike a PhD, which emphasizes research for academia, PsyD programs take about 4 to 7 years, involve less research than PhDs, and lead to careers in direct patient care, mental health, leadership, or corporate roles with a degree requiring extensive supervised clinical training for licensure. So I guess what I'm unclear on is if you're a PsyD, what can you do with just a PsyD? Right? That's the question. So if you're just a PsyD, can you still give therapy? Or do you need a license in something different to do it? So if you get your PsyD, do you still need a license in like a different realm? I don't know. I'm not an expert in this on the training. I know of them. I know of a PsyD. I know of like a PhD in psychology. I know of psychologists, clinical psychologists, research psychologists, social psychologists, psychiatrists. Because generally they say a clinical psychologist is more difficult to become than a PsyD, as far as I know. You need to go through the licensing process after getting your PsyD to practice as a psychologist. Okay, I mean, that makes sense. So it sounds like he didn't do the licensing to be a psychologist. And he sounds like he maybe did some sort of lateral thing. He did like a lateral thing to become an LMFT, something along those lines. He began the process in March, but stopped in June. Interesting. Interesting indeed. But again, it's good. It's good for everyone to do their diligence about things. Now, granted, you're all talking to someone as well that doesn't have any of those licenses either. So I'm not someone that like will hold that against somebody. It doesn't make what they say wrong. Parts that wouldn't be good would be like with what Sadia Khan has done by deceiving people. If you deceive people, that's not good. I would not like that. So he got his LMFT in 2017, or at least he's upfront and not lying. Yes. Sadia is the worst of all cases, by the way. I mean, she's all over the place. I think she's connected to Dubai billionaires. Yeah, it's out of control. She's out of control. So basically, if you're an LMFT, LMFTs are not like treating narcissists and borderlines per se. What an LMFT is doing is working on marriages and relationships, which is a different thing, right? That's a different thing. It's and I guess LMFTs can see people individually too, I guess, right? You just think LMFT, you think also couples. We sure as heck should learn these distinctions and how to get people. Yeah, I mean, it's good to know, especially in what we do here. It's good to know what all the credentials mean, etc. Because, I mean, if you have a PsyD, you call yourself a doctor, right? But you can get a PhD in freaking philosophy. Or I guess that's what a PhD is. Doctorate of Philosophy in something. No, I've not heard of Jay Reed. Or maybe I have. Maybe I saw him, I'd know him. But I have not off the top of my head. Jared, you are honest in this space. Honesty is gold. I try to keep it real. It's important to me to keep it real because I'm not good at being fake. I don't want to be fake. So I just am me and I let the cards fall as they may. That's how I roll, Ellie. You know that. But yeah, it's interesting. We'll check that stuff out with him. But all right, everybody. It's about time to rock and roll here. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, as they say. But I appreciate everyone's participation. Kat to Thrive, Ellie, Rhodes. No Jolly, no George tonight. Phil Bradley, he might be still floating in the background. Crazy. There's Crazy, Christy. And Awake. There's Awake. Awake's gone now too. Vitas. Salerno obtained his PsyD from California USC, a private for California Southern University. Is that the same as USC? A private for-profit university that operates entirely online. Its PsyD program is not accredited by the APA, the American Psychological Association. Yeah, it makes you wonder why you would do that, right? Or did you go get that program there if it's not accredited? Hard time texting on this Wii device. Wii-lass. I'll make sure to tune in earlier next time. It's all good, Ellie. Or not Ellie, Crazy. As long as you found us. You found us better late than never. Very interesting, Rhodes, though. Very interesting new developments. Were other people talking about that, or did you just kind of look into it yourself? Yeah, that's good. Knowledge is power, as they say, right? Well, that's what they say. It's good to not put people on the pedestal too high, because there's only one place for them to go from the pedestal. I'll say it does seem, what's the word? I guess you wouldn't have thought it was just an LMFT, right? That's what you wouldn't have thought. Yeah, I mean, I thought maybe other people were talking about it or something. Because he's got some haters out there that maybe would have loved to know that. Like some of the self-aware narcs of the world, for example. Yeah, like I said, I'll look into it more before I'll say anything, because I mean, he's a friend of mine, so yes, I would say that as well. You got to trust your gut, no matter what it is. Dr. Salerno definitely has done more work. He's not just your average LMFT, but definitely don't idolize anyone anyways. Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Tooth 5. And the pedestal's not good. I see that happens a lot. People they find a new person in the space, and then they think everything they say turns to gold. I mean, this happens in the political space all the time too. So in the political space, some new influencer rises through the ranks, and everyone think, oh no, they're the one beacon of truth. And then it never lasts. I mean, does social media fame ever last forever? I mean, Joe Rogan's got a pretty long run of social media fame. I mean, he's got a long run. Yeah, I mean, the self-aware narcs, they hate Dr. Salerno. The environmental folks don't like him. And there's like other professionals, they're not the biggest fan of that either. But it is what it is. We'll have to see. Time will reveal all, is what they say. Yeah, that's not surprising. That part's he wouldn't be able to pump them out so quickly if they were published by someone else. And again, though, I mean, at that point, does it make someone like lose a little bit of their not authenticity, but legitimacy? I don't know. I have learned to not speak quickly about things that I don't really know. So I won't make an assessment about this. I have to think it over. You might be wise. Yeah, I published a book. I self-published a book on Amazon. It's much different than going to like the random house or fill in the Penguin Publishing, right? Yeah. It's a different ball game. They're held to different standards in that case. It's a different standard. Like a Penguin is going to hold people, I would think, to a different standard. And they're also going to market your book. They're going to market your book and you're going to do all that good stuff. But they also take a lot of your profits too. No, I will. I got to see what I think is going on with it. Or what I think about it. I've read 2 of his books so far. I've read Nature and Nurture of Narcissism, and I've read Traumatic Cognitive Dissonance. And I also have Cruelty by Nature, but I have not read that one in full yet. They're still good books. Still good books. Yeah, I mean, the thing in question is just what his experience is, right? That's what's in question, really. Yeah, I hear you, Rhodes. I hear you. But yeah, you're rock and roll now. But I'll be back again tomorrow for you all. We'll have another video to break down. We'll have a whole group of people to break down with all these people. Dr. K. And if you all know Duncan Trussell, he did a cool interview with his mother. And his mother's passed away. But his mother was a cool woman. She was a psychologist. And so they have pretty cool discussions on YouTube. We might break them down at a point. BS2 Thrive, Ellie, Rhodes, Awake, Kat, everyone that's here. Appreciate your support. Appreciate the super chats. And keep being awesome out there. And I'll see you all again soon.